Autumn rain pattered against the windows of Grayson Tower, home to one of Boston's most prestigious investment firms. Jonathan Grayson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, observing the city spread out below like a living organism of light and movement. At 45, he had conquered the financial world with ruthless efficiency, amassing a fortune that placed him among the elite of New England's business circles. His tailored Italian suit, navy blue with subtle pinstripes, cost more than what most people in the building below earned in a month. "Mr. Grayson?" His executive assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 3 o'clock with Nakamura Industries is waiting in the conference room." Jonathan pressed the intercom button. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, Margaret." He took a final look at the rain-soaked city. This meeting would secure another multi-million-dollar deal, another victory to add to his already impressive portfolio. Yet lately, these victories had begun to feel hollow. Each success added to his wealth, but did little to fill the growing emptiness inside him, an emptiness he refused to acknowledge, let alone address. The elevator doors opened on the 35th floor, and Jonathan stepped out, heading toward the conference room. His path took him through the main reception area, usually empty this late in the afternoon, except for the receptionist. Today was different. A small figure sat alone on one of the reception area's sleek leather chairs. A child, a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with auburn hair pulled into 2 slightly messy braids. She wore a simple blue dress under a worn but clean raincoat, and her scuffed shoes barely reached the floor from where she sat. Her face was partially hidden as she studied something in her hands, what appeared to be a well-worn Bible. Jonathan barely registered her presence as he strode past, his mind already occupied with the negotiation tactics he planned to employ with the Japanese executives. "Excuse me, sir." The small voice was so unexpected that Jonathan stopped instinctively. He turned to see the little girl now standing, her Bible clutched tightly against her chest. "Are you someone important here?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady for a child addressing a stranger. Jonathan's first instinct was to ignore her and continue to his meeting. Children were not his area of expertise, nor were they welcome in a corporate environment, but something in the earnestness of her expression made him pause. "I'm the CEO of this company," he replied curtly. "Where are your parents?" The girl stepped closer and Jonathan noticed her eyes, a striking blue that seemed too wise for her young face. "My mommy is upstairs on the 40th floor. She's interviewing for a job at the law office." "I see." Jonathan glanced at his watch. "Well, you should stay here until she returns." He turned to leave, but her next words stopped him. "Please, sir, I need your help." Her voice trembled slightly. "My mommy is sick, and we need that job really badly." Jonathan sighed, turning back to face her. "Look, little girl." "Emily," she supplied. "Emily Grace Sullivan." "Emily," he corrected. "I'm sure your mother will do fine in her interview. Now, I have an important meeting." "But she might not get the job because she gets really tired sometimes," Emily interrupted, her words tumbling out rapidly now. "And we pray every night that someone will give her a chance, but people don't want to hire her when they find out she's sick, and we need money for her medicine, and—" She stopped abruptly, taking a deep breath. "And I saw you come in with your fancy suit and big briefcase, and I thought maybe you could help us." Jonathan felt an unexpected twinge of something, pity, annoyance. He couldn't quite identify it. He glanced at his watch again. The Nakamura meeting was important, but his tardiness would only increase their anticipation. He could spare a minute. "What's wrong with your mother?" he asked, surprised by his own curiosity. "She has something wrong with her heart," Emily replied, her small fingers tightening around her Bible. "The doctors say she needs an operation, but it costs a lot of money. She works really hard, but since Daddy died in Afghanistan, it's just been the 2 of us." Jonathan's expression remained impassive, but inwardly he felt that strange twinge again. A military widow with a heart condition, struggling to find work while raising a child alone. It was the kind of human interest story that appeared in those Christmas charity appeals he routinely ignored. "I pray every night," Emily continued, "and I know God will send someone to help us. And then I saw you, and you looked—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Important." And for the first time in years, Jonathan felt momentarily at a loss. This child's simple faith was so foreign to his world of leveraged buyouts and profit margins. "Emily, I don't know what you think I can do," he began, then stopped as his assistant appeared around the corner. "Mr. Grayson, the Nakamura team is getting restless," Margaret said, then noticed the child. "Oh, is everything all right?" Before Jonathan could respond, Emily spoke. "Are you his helper? He's going to help my mommy get a job because she's really good at working, even though she's sick." Margaret raised an eyebrow, looking to Jonathan for explanation. After a moment's hesitation, he made a decision that would alter the course of multiple lives, including his own. "Margaret, please tell the Nakamura team I'll be with them shortly. Then contact HR and find out who's interviewing for positions at Patterson and Weiss on 40. Look for a Sullivan." Yes, sir," Margaret replied, professionally hiding her surprise. Jonathan turned back to Emily. "Where exactly is your mother interviewing?" "At the law place. Patterson and something," Emily replied. "For an assistant job." "Administrative assistant," Jonathan corrected automatically. "Let's go find your mother." Emily's face lit up with hope so pure it was almost painful to witness. "Really? You're going to help?" "I'm going to see what the situation is," Jonathan said carefully, unwilling to commit himself further. As they walked to the elevator, Emily slipped her small hand into his. Jonathan stiffened at the unexpected contact, but didn't pull away. Her tiny fingers felt fragile within his grasp, a physical reminder of the innocence and vulnerability beside him. "What's your name?" Emily asked as the elevator doors closed. "Jonathan Grayson." Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said solemnly. "I knew God would send someone." Jonathan didn't respond. He'd abandoned any belief in God long ago, finding it incompatible with the cutthroat world he inhabited. Yet something about this child's unwavering faith stirred memories of his own childhood, when his grandmother had taken him to church every Sunday before she passed away. The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, and Emily led him confidently down the hallway to the offices of Patterson and Weiss, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. In the reception area, a woman sat alone, her posture straight, despite the evident exhaustion in her face. "Mommy!" Emily called out, running toward her. The woman, Jonathan guessed she was in her mid-30s, looked up in surprise. "Emily, what are you doing up here? I told you to wait downstairs." "I brought help, Mommy. This is Mr. Grayson. He owns the building and he's going to help you get a job." Catherine Sullivan looked mortified as she stood to face Jonathan. She was tall and slender, too slender, as if she'd recently lost weight, with the same auburn hair as her daughter, though hers was pulled back in a simple, professional bun. Despite her evident fatigue and embarrassment, there was a quiet dignity in her bearing that caught Jonathan's attention. "I am so sorry," she said, extending her hand. "I don't know what my daughter told you, but—" "She said you're interviewing for a position," Jonathan interrupted, shaking her hand briefly, "and that you're having health issues." Catherine's cheeks flushed. "Emily shouldn't have bothered you with our personal matters. She's just—" Her voice trailed off as she placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Worried about her mother," Jonathan finished for her. "Understandable." He studied Catherine more carefully. There were shadows under her eyes, and her handshake had been cool to the touch. Possible symptoms of the heart condition Emily had mentioned. "How did the interview go?" he asked. Catherine's expression told him everything. "They were very polite," she said diplomatically. "But they're concerned about your health affecting your attendance," Jonathan guessed. She nodded reluctantly. "It's a demanding position, and they need someone reliable. I assured them that my condition is manageable with medication, but—" She shrugged slightly, the gesture conveying both frustration and resignation. Jonathan made another impulsive decision, the second in less than 15 minutes, a personal record for a man who prided himself on calculated business moves. "I might have an alternative opportunity," he said. "My executive assistant could use help managing my personal affairs, household administration, scheduling private appointments, coordinating with vendors. It would be primarily remote work, with flexible hours." Catherine looked stunned. "Mr. Grayson, you don't even know me." "I know you're qualified enough to get an interview at Patterson and Weiss, which means you're overqualified for what I'm suggesting." He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. "Come to my office tomorrow at 9. We'll discuss details." Catherine accepted the card, reading it with widening eyes as she recognized his name. "You're that Jonathan Grayson, of Grayson Capital." He nodded once, already turning to leave. 9 o'clock. Don't be late." "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," Emily called after him. "I told you God would help us." Jonathan didn't acknowledge her words as he walked away, but they echoed in his mind as he headed to his delayed meeting. God had nothing to do with it, he told himself. It was simply a practical solution to a human resources issue. Catherine Sullivan would either prove useful or she wouldn't. The arrangement would be terminated if she couldn't perform. Yet, as he entered the conference room and smoothly apologized to the Japanese executives for his tardiness, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that he was lying to himself. For the first time in years, Jonathan Grayson had made a decision based not on profit or advantage, but on something dangerously close to compassion. The next morning, Jonathan arrived at his office earlier than usual. He had spent a restless night, alternating between questioning his impulsive offer and strategizing how to make it work. By the time his alarm went off, he had developed a pragmatic plan that would make Catherine Sullivan useful to his organization while accommodating her health concerns. At precisely 9 o'clock, Margaret escorted Catherine into his office. In daylight, without the strain of an interview already behind her, she looked somewhat better than she had the previous day. She wore a simple but professional navy dress, modest heels, and minimal jewelry, a woman making the best impression possible on a limited budget. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Grayson," she said, as she took the seat he indicated. "I want to apologize again for Emily's behavior yesterday." Jonathan waved away her concern. "Your daughter is remarkably articulate for her age, and determined." A brief smile softened Catherine's features. "She's always been that way?" "Even more so since her father died 3 years ago." The smile faded. "She's had to grow up too quickly." "She mentioned you have a heart condition," Jonathan said, never one to approach subjects indirectly. Catherine nodded, straightening in her chair. "Dilated cardiomyopathy. My heart is enlarged and doesn't pump efficiently. Eventually I'll need a transplant, but for now, medication helps manage the symptoms." "And the medication is expensive." "Very. Even with the military survivor benefits and insurance, the out-of-pocket costs are substantial." She met his gaze directly. "Mr. Grayson, I appreciate your offer, but I don't want charity. I want to earn my way." Jonathan respected her pride. "What I'm offering isn't charity, Mrs. Sullivan." "Miss," she corrected gently, "but please call me Catherine." "Catherine," he amended. "What I'm proposing is a legitimate position with real responsibilities. I need someone to manage my personal affairs, a household manager who can work primarily remotely, with occasional in-person meetings when necessary." He outlined the responsibilities: coordinating with his housekeeper, personal chef, and maintenance staff for his Boston penthouse and his summer home on Cape Cod, managing his personal schedule separate from his business appointments, handling correspondence not related to Grayson Capital, overseeing household expenses and budgets. The salary would be $75,000 annually, with comprehensive health insurance that would cover your condition and any treatments you require. Catherine's composure slipped momentarily, her eyes widening at the figure. It was far more than the administrative assistant position would have paid. "That's extremely generous," she said carefully. "It's market rate for the level of discretion and competence I require," Jonathan replied. "I don't make charitable business decisions, Miss Sullivan. If you can't perform the duties, the arrangement won't work, regardless of your personal circumstances." "I understand." She straightened further. "I was an executive assistant before my husband's deployment. After he died, I scaled back to part-time work to be more available for Emily. When my condition was diagnosed last year, I lost even that position due to my medical appointments and episodes." "Episodes?" "Fainting spells, primarily. They're less frequent now that my medication is properly adjusted, but they made my employer nervous." Jonathan nodded. "Working remotely would mitigate that concern. You could rest when needed without scrutiny." Catherine studied him with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "May I ask why you're doing this, Mr. Grayson? You could hire anyone for this position." The question caught him off guard. He wasn't entirely sure himself why he had made the offer. "Your daughter," he said finally. "She was persuasive." Catherine's expression softened. "She has that effect on people. Her faith gives her a certainty I sometimes envy." "You're religious as well?" Jonathan asked, noting the small cross necklace she wore. "I'm a Christian, yes. It's been challenging sometimes, reconciling my faith with the hardships we've faced, but—" She paused. "It helps to believe there's a purpose to everything, even when we can't see it." Jonathan kept his expression neutral. He had no patience for such sentiments, but respected her right to them. "When can you start?" "Immediately," she answered without hesitation. "Good. Margaret will help you complete the necessary paperwork, and IT will set you up with secure remote access to my personal scheduling and household management systems." He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "I expect daily updates via email and weekly in-person meetings, health permitting." Catherine rose as well, extending her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson. I won't let you down." Her hand was cold again, he noted as they shook, but her grip was firm. "See that you don't," he replied, then added, "How will you manage childcare for Emily?" "She attends the Christian Academy on Commonwealth Avenue. They have after-school programs, but they're—" She hesitated. "Expensive," he finished for her. "Consider it covered as part of your benefits package. It's more efficient if you don't have to worry about childcare logistics." Relief washed over her face. "That's very generous." "It's practical," he corrected. 9 a.m. next Monday for our first weekly meeting. Margaret will send you the details of your responsibilities today." As Catherine left his office, Jonathan returned to the window, staring out at the city. What had possessed him to make such an offer? $75,000 plus premium health insurance for a household manager was indeed at the high end of market rate, but still reasonable for someone of Catherine's experience. The childcare, however, was an unusual addition. He told himself it was simply ensuring his new employee would be maximally productive, nothing more. But as he turned back to his desk, his eyes fell on a small object on the floor, near where Emily had stood the day before. He bent to pick it up, a child's bookmark with a Bible verse printed on it. "And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.'" Matthew 25:40. Jonathan stared at the bookmark for a long moment before placing it in his desk drawer. Coincidence? Nothing more. Yet he couldn't quite dismiss the timing. Over the next few weeks, Catherine proved herself extraordinarily capable. Working remotely from her modest apartment, she brought order to Jonathan's personal affairs with an efficiency that impressed even him. His household staff, who had previously received instructions from a rotating cast of assistants, reported that Catherine's clear direction and respectful manner made their jobs significantly easier. For their weekly meetings, Catherine would come to his office, her color gradually improving as her health stabilized under the comprehensive insurance plan that covered her medications and treatments. She was always professional, keeping the focus strictly on business matters, yet there was a warmth to her interactions that contrasted sharply with the cold efficiency Jonathan was accustomed to. "The renovations at the Cape House are on schedule," she reported during their fourth weekly meeting. "The contractor says they'll be completed well before your usual summer residence period." Jonathan nodded, reviewing the detailed progress report she'd prepared. "The cost overruns? I negotiated them down by 14%, Catherine replied. "I also arranged for the furniture delivery to coincide with completion rather than the arbitrary date they initially proposed, which would have resulted in storage fees." "Good." Jonathan studied her across the desk. "You're feeling better?" Catherine looked momentarily surprised by the personal observation. "Yes, the new medication regimen is working well. Dr. Winters, the specialist you recommended, adjusted my treatment plan. No recent episodes? None in the past 2 weeks, she confirmed. Jonathan nodded again. "And Emily, how is she adjusting to the new school arrangements?" A genuine smile transformed Catherine's face. "She loves the extended programs. They have music classes now that we can afford them. She's learning piano. She's musical. Very. Like her father." A shadow of grief crossed Catherine's features before she composed herself. "He played guitar, taught himself during deployments." Jonathan found himself wanting to ask more about Catherine's late husband, but restrained himself. Their relationship was professional, and personal inquiries would cross a boundary he preferred to maintain. Yet, as Catherine gathered her materials to leave, he found himself saying, "My grandmother played piano. She tried to teach me as a boy, but I lacked the patience." Catherine paused, clearly surprised by this personal disclosure. "Perhaps you were just too young. Many adults find musical instruments more accessible when they're older." "Perhaps." Jonathan rose to end the meeting. "Next week, same time." As Catherine left, Jonathan realized it was the first personal detail he had shared with anyone in years. He wasn't sure why he had mentioned his grandmother, a woman whose gentle faith and music had been the only warmth in his otherwise austere childhood. He pushed the thought aside and returned to the quarterly projections awaiting his review. Business was what he understood. Business was where he excelled. Business was safe. But that evening, as he ate alone in his penthouse with its panoramic views of Boston Harbor, he found the silence oppressive in a way he never had before. He thought of Catherine and Emily in their small apartment, wondering if they ate dinner together, if Emily chatted about her day or played simple tunes on a keyboard for her mother. The thought disturbed him, and he pushed it away, turning instead to review acquisition proposals for distressed companies ripe for his particular brand of financial engineering. 2 days later, Margaret interrupted his afternoon schedule. "Mr. Grayson, there's a situation with Miss Sullivan." Jonathan looked up sharply. "What kind of situation?" "She collapsed while picking up Emily from school. They've taken her to Massachusetts General." Jonathan was on his feet before Margaret finished speaking. "Cancel my remaining appointments. Have my car brought around." "Sir?" Margaret couldn't hide her surprise. Jonathan Grayson never altered his schedule, especially not for personal matters involving employees. "Miss Sullivan's condition directly impacts her ability to fulfill her responsibilities," he said stiffly. "I need to assess the situation." The justification sounded hollow even to his own ears, but Margaret merely nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll let the driver know." The drive to Massachusetts General took 20 minutes in Boston's afternoon traffic, 20 minutes during which Jonathan questioned his decision repeatedly. Why was he personally going to check on Catherine? He could have sent Margaret or simply called the hospital. It was irrational, inefficient. Yet he found himself striding through the emergency department entrance, approaching the information desk with an authority that brooked no resistance. "Catherine Sullivan," he said to the receptionist, "admitted earlier today." The woman typed on her computer. "Are you family, sir?" "I'm her employer," Jonathan replied. "Jonathan Grayson, where is she?" "I'm sorry, sir, but only family members can—" "Call Dr. Harrison Winters," Jonathan interrupted. "Tell him Jonathan Grayson needs information about his patient, Catherine Sullivan." The receptionist hesitated, then made the call. A few minutes later, a tall man in a white coat approached. "Jonathan," Dr. Winters greeted him. They had known each other for years, moving in the same elite Boston circles. "This is unexpected." "How is she?" Jonathan asked without preamble. "Stable now. She had a significant arrhythmia episode, likely triggered by stress or fatigue. We've adjusted her medication, but this is a reminder that her condition is serious." "What's the long-term prognosis?" Dr. Winters sighed. "Without a transplant, she has perhaps 2 to 3 years. With optimal medical management, maybe 5. Jonathan absorbed this information with an outward calm that belied his inner turmoil. "And her daughter?" "The little girl? She's in the waiting room with a teacher from her school. Social services has been called since there doesn't appear to be any family available." "That won't be necessary," Jonathan said. "I'll take responsibility for Emily until her mother is discharged." Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow. "That's unusually involved for you, Jonathan. Miss Sullivan is a valuable employee," Jonathan replied coldly. "Ensuring her daughter's well-being is a practical matter." Dr. Winters looked skeptical, but nodded. "I'll let social services know. You can see Miss Sullivan now if you'd like. Room 315. Jonathan found Catherine in a hospital bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. Various monitors beeped softly, tracking her heart rhythm. Her eyes were closed, her face pale. He stood awkwardly at the door, suddenly unsure of his purpose there. As he considered leaving, Catherine's eyes fluttered open. "Mr. Grayson?" Her voice was weak with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Checking on an employee," he said, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Embarrassed," she admitted with a faint smile. "Collapsing at Emily's school isn't exactly professional." "Your health takes precedence over appearances," Jonathan said. "Dr. Winters has updated me on your condition." Concern immediately replaced embarrassment. "Emily is in the waiting room. I've arranged to take care of her until you're discharged." Catherine's eyes widened. What?" "It's the most efficient solution," Jonathan said. "Unless there's someone else you'd prefer to contact?" Catherine shook her head slightly. "No, there's no one. My parents are deceased and Richard was an only child. His parents live in Arizona and aren't in good health themselves." She studied him with obvious confusion. "But I never expected you to—" "It's temporary," Jonathan said firmly. "How long will you be hospitalized?" "Doctor Winters wants to keep me for 48 hours for observation and to adjust my medication." Jonathan nodded. "I'll have Margaret arrange for Emily's transportation to and from school, and she can stay at my penthouse. There's plenty of room." "Mr. Grayson, that's too much. Surely there's a service or—" "This is simpler," he interrupted, "unless you object to your daughter staying with me specifically." Catherine hesitated. "No, it's not that. Emily already thinks you're some kind of answer to her prayers, but I don't want to impose or make our professional relationship complicated." "It's 2 days, Miss Sullivan. I assure you I can manage a child for that long without significant disruption." Catherine still looked uncertain but nodded. "Thank you. Could you send her in to see me before you take her? I need to explain what's happening." "Of course." As Jonathan left to find Emily, he again questioned his own actions. Taking care of a child for 2 days was far outside his experience and comfort zone. His penthouse wasn't child-proofed. He had no idea what children ate or how to entertain a 7-year-old girl. Yet something drove him forward. Perhaps the memory of his own childhood, when his parents' death had left him in the care of a distant relative who had viewed him as nothing more than an inconvenience. He found Emily sitting in the waiting room, her small legs swinging as she read from her ever-present Bible. She looked up as he approached, her face brightening with recognition. "Mr. Grayson, have you come to see Mommy too? The nice doctor said she's going to be okay." but she needs to stay here for a little while. Jonathan sat in the chair beside her. Yes, I've just spoken with your mother. She wants to see you. And then he paused, uncertain how to explain the arrangement to a child. Then you'll be staying with me for a couple of days while your mother gets better. Emily's eyes widened. At your house? Is it big? Yes, it's adequate in size. Do you have any kids? She asked. No. A wife? No. Emily considered this. Are you lonely? The question caught Jonathan entirely off guard. I'm busy, he answered, evading the unexpected inquiry. Your mother is waiting to see you. Shall we go? Emily nodded, slipping her small hand into his as they walked to Catherine's room. The gesture still felt foreign to Jonathan, but less uncomfortable than it had the first time. Catherine's face lit up when Emily entered, though Jonathan could see her trying to mask her concern and fatigue for her daughter's benefit. Hey, sweetie, she said, opening her arms. Emily ran to the bed, carefully hugging her mother. Are you okay, Mommy? The doctor said your heart was beating too fast. I'm going to be fine, Catherine assured her. The doctors are giving me medicine to make my heart behave better, but I need to stay here for 2 days so they can make sure it's working. Emily nodded solemnly. Mr. Grayson said I can stay at his house. He said it's big. Catherine's eyes met Jonathan's over Emily's head. Yes, that's right. You'll go to school normally, and Mr. Grayson or his assistant will pick you up. You need to be on your very best behavior, okay? I will, Emily promised. And I'll pray for you every night, Mommy. Catherine's eyes glistened. Thank you, sweetheart. That will help a lot. After a few more minutes of reassurance, a nurse came to check Catherine's vitals, and Jonathan took the opportunity to lead Emily away. We'll come back tomorrow after school, he promised Catherine. Is there anything you need from home? There's a small overnight bag in my hall closet with essentials, Catherine said. And Emily will need her stuffed rabbit. It's on her bed. Jonathan nodded, making mental notes. I'll have someone collect them. Rest now. Everything will be managed. As they left the hospital, Emily looked up at him with those disconcertingly direct blue eyes. Thank you for helping us, Mr. Grayson. God must have sent you specially. Jonathan didn't know how to respond to such a statement, so he merely guided her to his waiting car, where his driver held the door open with carefully concealed surprise at the sight of his employer with a small child. Home, sir? The driver asked. First to Miss Sullivan's apartment to collect some necessities, then home, Jonathan instructed. The visit to Catherine and Emily's apartment was an education in itself. The 2-bedroom unit was small, but meticulously organized and clean. Emily led him confidently to her room to retrieve Mr. Hoppy, a well-loved stuffed rabbit missing one eye, while Jonathan found Catherine's overnight bag exactly where she had said it would be. What struck him most was the evidence of love throughout the modest space. Photos of Emily with her parents adorned the walls, including several of a handsome man in military uniform, whom Jonathan assumed was Richard Sullivan. There were Emily's artwork displayed prominently on the refrigerator, homemade cushions on the worn sofa, and a small upright piano against one wall, not new but well-maintained. It was nothing like his sleek, impersonal penthouse, with its designer furniture and museum-quality art. Items selected by an interior designer to project success and sophistication, rather than to provide comfort or joy. Ready, Emily announced, clutching her rabbit and a small backpack. I packed Mr. Hoppy's pajamas too. Jonathan nodded, as if this were perfectly logical. Then let's go. Emily's reaction to his penthouse was everything he might have expected. She stood in the center of the vast living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, her mouth forming a perfect O of astonishment. "You live in the sky!" she exclaimed, running to press her face against the glass. "Look how small everything is down there. Be careful," Jonathan cautioned automatically, though the windows were perfectly safe. "It's beautiful," Emily said, turning to him. "But where are all your things?" Jonathan glanced around the minimalist space. "What things? You know, your stuff. pictures and books and treasures. I have books in my study, he replied, and the art on the walls is quite valuable. Emily looked at the large, abstract painting dominating one wall. That doesn't look like anything. Despite himself, Jonathan felt his lips twitch. It's abstract expressionism. It's not meant to look like anything specific. Emily considered this. I could draw you a picture of something real if you want. I'm pretty good at horses. The offer, made with such earnest generosity, caught Jonathan off guard. That's very kind. Perhaps later. He showed Emily to the guest room, which, like the rest of the penthouse, was elegantly appointed but impersonal. You'll sleep here. There's a bathroom through that door. Emily placed Mr. Hoppy carefully on the bed. It's very fancy. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. You can call me Jonathan, he found himself saying, since we'll be housemates temporarily. Emily beamed. Okay, Jonathan. What's for dinner? I'm kind of hungry. Dinner. Of course, the child would need to eat. Jonathan typically dined out or had his chef prepare meals in advance that he could heat himself. What would you like? He asked, stalling while he considered options. Mac and cheese? Emily suggested hopefully, with hot dogs cut up in it. Jonathan had never eaten such a combination in his life and was certain nothing of the sort existed in his kitchen. I'll see what can be arranged, he said, reaching for his phone. An hour later, they sat at his rarely used dining table. Emily happily devoured macaroni and cheese with sliced hot dogs that his highly trained personal chef had prepared with barely concealed amusement. Jonathan picked at a more sophisticated version of the same, created especially for him. Do you eat alone all the time? Emily asked between bites. Usually, Jonathan replied. I often work late. That sounds lonely, Emily observed. Mommy and I always eat together, even when she's really tired. She says families should share meals because Jesus did it with his disciples. Jonathan had no response to this theological justification for family dinners. We should say grace, Emily continued, placing her fork down and extending her small hand toward him. Jonathan stared at it. Pardon? You know, say thank you to God for the food? We always do it before eating. Jonathan couldn't remember the last time he'd said grace, perhaps at his grandmother's table as a child, but Emily's expectant face made refusal seem unnecessarily cruel. Awkwardly, he took her offered hand. Emily bowed her head and closed her eyes. Dear God, she began, thank you for this yummy food and for Jonathan's nice house and for taking care of my mommy at the hospital. Please help her heart get better soon. And thank you for sending Jonathan to help us, just like I prayed for. Amen. Amen, Jonathan echoed automatically, then withdrew his hand. Don't you ever pray? Emily asked with a child's directness. Not for many years, Jonathan admitted. Why not? It was a simple question that required a complex answer, one involving his parents' deaths when he was 12, his grandmother's passing 3 years later, and the harsh realities of a world where wealth and power seemed far more effective than faith and prayer. I suppose I lost the habit, he said finally. Emily considered this. You should try it again. God always listens, even when you haven't talked to him in a long time. Like when my friend Zoe and I had a fight and didn't speak for a whole week, but then we started talking again, and now we're best friends. Jonathan smiled despite himself. I'll keep that in mind. After dinner, the reality of entertaining a 7-year-old for the evening became apparent. Jonathan's penthouse, designed for sophisticated adult living, offered few diversions for a child. Do you have any games? Emily asked, looking around the living room. I have chess, Jonathan offered. Emily brightened. I know chess. Daddy taught me before he went to heaven. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, skeptical that a child her age would truly understand the game, but he retrieved his handcrafted chess set from the study. To his surprise, Emily did indeed know the basic moves, though her strategy was understandably rudimentary. Daddy was really good, she explained as Jonathan captured her knight. He said chess helps you think about consequences. Your father was right, Jonathan replied, deliberately missing an opportunity to put her in check. Every move has consequences, some immediate and some far in the future. Like life, Emily said, surprising him again. Mommy says the choices we make can change everything, even when we don't know it at the time. Your mother is a wise woman, Jonathan said, allowing Emily to capture one of his pawns. She says wisdom comes from God, Emily replied, studying the board with intense concentration. James 1 verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all. Jonathan was struck by how naturally she quoted scripture, as if it were as normal as reciting a nursery rhyme. You know a lot of Bible verses, he observed. Emily nodded. Mommy and I read the Bible every night before bed, and I go to Sunday school at church. After Jonathan let her achieve a hard-fought draw in their chess game, he realized it was getting late. You should get ready for bed, he said. You have school tomorrow. Emily nodded and went to the guest room to change into her pajamas. When Jonathan checked on her a few minutes later, she was kneeling beside the bed, eyes closed, hands clasped. Now I lay me down to sleep, she was saying softly. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. God bless Mommy and help her heart get better. Bless Daddy in heaven. Bless Jonathan for letting me stay in his sky house. And please help everyone who's sad or sick or lonely. Amen. She climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Jonathan, could you read me a story? Mommy always reads to me before bed. Jonathan hesitated. I don't have any children's books. That's okay. You can read from my Bible. The story of David and Goliath is good. It's in 1 Samuel. Feeling distinctly out of his element, Jonathan accepted the Bible she offered and sat awkwardly on the edge of the bed. He found the passage and began to read the familiar story of the young shepherd facing the giant. Emily listened with rapt attention, despite clearly knowing the story already. When he finished, she sighed contentedly. I like that one because it shows that even when someone seems too big and scary, God can help you be brave, she said, snuggling deeper under the covers. Good night, Jonathan. Good night, Emily, he replied, placing the Bible on the nightstand and turning off the lamp. As he closed the door behind him, Jonathan was struck by the strangeness of the situation. 24 hours ago, his evening would have involved reviewing financial reports or attending a business dinner. Instead, he had eaten macaroni and cheese, played chess with a 7-year-old, and read a Bible story. Even stranger was the realization that it had been the most genuinely pleasant evening he had experienced in years. The following day established a routine of sorts. Margaret helped arrange for Emily's transportation to and from school, looking somewhat bemused at her employer's unusual domestic situation, but organizing everything with her typical efficiency. Jonathan worked from home, something he rarely did, to be available should any issues arise with Emily. In the afternoon, when she returned from school, he found himself once again adjusting his schedule to accommodate her presence. "Can we visit Mommy?" were Emily's first words upon returning to the penthouse. "Yes, I've arranged for us to go to the hospital at 5, Jonathan replied. "Do you have homework?" Emily nodded, pulling a folder from her backpack. "Math and spelling." "You should complete it before we go," Jonathan said. "You can work at the dining table." As Emily settled in with her worksheets, Jonathan sat across from her with his laptop, occasionally glancing up to check her progress. She worked diligently, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tackled multiplication problems. "Jonathan," she asked after a while, "can you help me check my answers?" He set aside his work and reviewed her completed math sheet. "Very good," he said, genuinely impressed by her accuracy. "Just check number 7 again." Emily looked at the problem, spotted her error, and corrected it. "Thanks. Now I just have spelling." "What are you working on?" Jonathan asked, finding himself curious about her education. "Words with silent letters," Emily replied, "like night and psalm and autumn." "Those can be tricky," Jonathan acknowledged. "English is full of inconsistencies. And then Miss Peterson says it's because English borrows words from lots of other languages," Emily said, carefully writing out her spelling words, like how we get psalm from Hebrew. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, impressed by this linguistic awareness. Your school seems to provide a good education. Emily nodded enthusiastically. I love school. We learn all the regular stuff plus Bible studies. And now I get to take piano lessons too, thanks to you. The simple gratitude in her statement made Jonathan uncomfortable. He wasn't accustomed to being thanked for what he considered basic business arrangements. Your mother works hard, he said. The compensation package is commensurate with her contributions. Emily looked confused by his formal language, but seemed to grasp his meaning. Mommy says you're very generous. She says God put you in our path for a reason. Again, Jonathan found himself without a response to her faith-based interpretation of events. Instead, he changed the subject. Finish your homework, and then we'll go see your mother. At the hospital, Catherine looked markedly better than she had the previous day. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and she was sitting up in bed when they arrived. Mommy! Emily ran to embrace her. Are you feeling better? Your color looks good. That's what Jonathan said on the way here. Catherine's eyes met Jonathan's over her daughter's head, surprise evident in her expression. Did he? Well, I am feeling much better. The new medication is helping. How was school? She asked Emily, smoothing her daughter's hair. Good. I got all my math problems right. Well, after Jonathan helped me find one mistake, and we're having a spelling test tomorrow on silent letters. It sounds like you're all prepared, Catherine said with a smile. And how are things at Mr. Grayson's home? Are you being a good guest? The best, Emily assured her. We played chess last night, and he read me the story of David and Goliath, and this morning his chef made me pancakes shaped like animals. Catherine looked to Jonathan with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. Chess and Bible stories. You're full of surprises, Mr. Grayson. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. Emily is an excellent houseguest, very self-sufficient. He helped me with my homework, Emily continued, and he's teaching me about investments while we drive here. I know what stocks and bonds are now. Catherine laughed. Financial education at 7. You don't waste time, do you, Mr. Grayson? She asked. Jonathan said simply. Children should understand how money works. It's a critical life skill often neglected in standard education. I don't disagree, Catherine said. I'm just surprised by how well you two seem to be getting along. There was a moment of awkward silence before Dr. Winters entered the room. Good news, Miss Sullivan, he announced. Your latest tests show significant improvement. If this continues, you could be discharged tomorrow morning instead of the evening, as we initially planned. That's wonderful, Catherine exclaimed. I can't wait to get back to normal. With some modifications, Dr. Winters cautioned. We need to discuss adjustments to your activity levels and working arrangements. I can step outside if you'd prefer privacy, Jonathan offered. No, please stay, Catherine said. Since this affects my work for you, you should hear the recommendations directly. Doctor, Winters outlined the changes Catherine would need to make. More rest periods throughout the day, stricter medication scheduling, weekly checkups for the next month, and a moderate exercise regimen to strengthen her heart safely. The good news is that working remotely is ideal for your condition, Dr. Winters concluded, and with proper management, we can significantly extend your quality of life while we wait for a suitable donor heart to become available. What are the chances of finding a donor? Jonathan asked. Dr. Winters's expression grew more serious. It's difficult to predict. Miss Sullivan's blood type and tissue markers are somewhat uncommon, which narrows the potential donor pool. But we have an excellent transplant program here, and she's high on the priority list due to her age and otherwise good health. After Dr. Winters left, Catherine turned to Jonathan. I want to thank you again for everything. Taking care of Emily, adjusting my work responsibilities. It's far beyond what most employers would do. It's a practical arrangement that benefits all parties, Jonathan replied automatically. Catherine smiled knowingly. If you say so, Mr. Grayson. Jonathan, he corrected. Emily has been calling me Jonathan, and in non-business settings it seems more appropriate. Jonathan, Catherine amended. Well, thank you regardless of your motivations. Emily, who had been unusually quiet during the medical discussion, suddenly spoke up. Mommy, can Jonathan come to dinner at our house when you're better? I told him we always eat together, and he eats alone all the time, which seems really sad. Catherine looked embarrassed. Emily, I'm sure Mr. Jonathan has many dining options that are far more appealing than our little apartment. Actually, Jonathan heard himself saying, I would be interested in experiencing your home-cooked meal for comparison purposes. The words surprised him as much as they did Catherine, whose eyebrows rose in astonishment. Comparison to what? She asked. My chef's interpretations of home cooking, Jonathan replied, attempting to frame the acceptance in business-like terms. It's useful to have diverse culinary references. Catherine laughed. Well, I can't promise gourmet cuisine, but you're welcome to join us once I'm back on my feet. Though I should warn you, Emily always insists on saying grace before meals. I've already been instructed in that ritual, Jonathan said dryly. She's quite insistent. That's my girl, Catherine said, hugging Emily close, a little missionary in the making. The following morning, Jonathan arranged for Catherine's discharge from the hospital and personally drove her and Emily back to their apartment. He had expected to simply drop them off and return to his normal routine, but Emily had other ideas. Aren't you coming in? She asked as he pulled up in front of their building. I want to show you my piano. Jonathan hesitated, glancing at his watch. I have meetings this afternoon. Just for a few minutes, Emily pleaded. Please, Catherine gave him an out. Emily, Mr. Jonathan has been very generous with his time already. We shouldn't impose further. But looking at Emily's hopeful face, Jonathan found himself unable to refuse. I can spare 15 minutes, he said, turning off the engine. Their apartment felt different with Catherine present, warmer somehow, more complete. Emily immediately led Jonathan to the small, upright piano. Watch, she said proudly, sitting on the bench and positioning her small hands on the keys. With intense concentration, she played a simple but recognizable rendition of Amazing Grace. There were a few missed notes, but her dedication to the piece was evident. When she finished, she looked up at Jonathan expectantly. That's the first song I learned all the way through. It's very good, Jonathan said sincerely. You've clearly been practicing diligently. My teacher says I have a good ear, Emily said. Do you want to try? Before Jonathan could decline, he found himself seated on the piano bench, Emily scooting over to make room. I haven't played in over 30 years, he warned. It's like riding a bike, Catherine said from where she sat resting on the sofa. You never completely forget. Hesitantly, Jonathan placed his hands on the keys, muscle memory guiding his fingers to a C major scale. It came back more easily than he expected, and soon he was playing a simple Bach minuet that his grandmother had taught him as a child. That's beautiful, Emily exclaimed when he finished. You're really good. I'm extremely rusty, Jonathan corrected. But thank you. You should practice more, Emily advised seriously. Miss Wilson says 10 minutes every day is better than an hour once a week. Sound advice for many endeavors, Jonathan agreed, standing up. But now I really must go. Miss Sullivan, Catherine, please take the rest of the week to recover fully. Your remote work can wait. That's not necessary, Catherine began to protest. It's medically advisable, Jonathan countered. Doctor's orders. Thank you, Catherine said softly, for everything. Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, Emily added, throwing her arms around his waist in an unexpected hug. Jonathan stiffened momentarily, then awkwardly patted her back. You're welcome, Emily. I'll see you both next week. As he drove back to his office, Jonathan felt oddly disoriented. For 48 hours, his life had been disrupted by a child's presence, a child who prayed before meals, quoted scripture, and played Amazing Grace on the piano, a child who had somehow managed to get him to play Bach for the first time in 3 decades. More disturbing still was the realization that returning to his normal routine felt less like a relief and more like a loss. The weeks that followed established a new pattern in Jonathan's life. Catherine returned to work remotely, now with a better health management plan. Their weekly in-person meetings continued, but they were no longer strictly business. Jonathan found himself asking about Emily's progress at school and piano lessons, and Catherine seemed increasingly comfortable sharing personal details about their life. Emily, for her part, had apparently decided that Jonathan was now part of their extended circle. She sent him drawings with Bible verses written in her careful handwriting, which Margaret delivered with barely concealed amusement. When Jonathan had to travel to New York for business, he returned to find a handmade card wishing him safe travels, decorated with a surprisingly accurate sketch of an airplane. "Emily wanted to make sure you knew we were thinking of you," Catherine explained during their next meeting, looking slightly embarrassed. "I hope it wasn't inappropriate." "It was thoughtful," Jonathan replied, unwilling to admit how much the simple gesture had affected him. He had kept the card on his nightstand, looking at it each evening with a mixture of confusion and warmth he couldn't quite define. 3 months after Catherine's hospitalization, Jonathan received an invitation that challenged his carefully maintained boundaries even further. "Emily would like you to attend her piano recital next Friday," Catherine said, as they concluded their weekly meeting. "It's at the school chapel at 7. She's playing Amazing Grace and a simple Mozart piece." Jonathan immediately thought of several legitimate excuses: an investor dinner, quarterly projections to review, a potential acquisition that required his attention. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'll be there." Catherine's surprise was evident. "Really? You don't have to come. I know how busy you are, and a children's recital isn't exactly high-level entertainment." "I've never attended a piano recital," Jonathan said. "It's a new experience. I'm curious." Catherine studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Well, Emily will be thrilled. She's already reserved seats for us in the 2nd row. Apparently the acoustics are better there, according to her teacher." On the evening of the recital, Jonathan found himself in the small chapel of Emily's Christian Academy, surrounded by parents and family members eagerly awaiting their children's performances. He felt distinctly out of place in his bespoke suit amid the more casual attire of the other attendees, but Catherine's warm smile when he took the seat Emily had reserved for him eased his discomfort somewhat. "I didn't think you'd really come," she admitted quietly as they waited for the program to begin. "I said I would," Jonathan replied simply. "Yes, you did." Catherine looked at him thoughtfully. "You always keep your word, don't you?" Before Jonathan could respond, the music teacher stepped forward to welcome everyone, and the recital began. One by one, children ranging from 6 to 12 years old performed their pieces, some with visible nervousness, others with surprising confidence. When Emily's turn came, she walked to the piano with poise beyond her years. She wore a simple blue dress, new, Jonathan noted, perhaps purchased with her mother's improved salary, and her auburn hair was neatly styled with a matching ribbon. She seated herself at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play Amazing Grace. Her performance was not flawless, but it was heartfelt. Jonathan found himself unexpectedly moved by the simple melody and the evident care with which Emily played each note. When she finished, the applause was enthusiastic. Emily beamed, scanning the audience until she located Jonathan and Catherine. The pure joy on her face when she saw Jonathan was startling in its intensity, as if his mere presence was a gift she treasured. After the recital, Emily rushed to them, still glowing with excitement. "Did you like it? I made 2 mistakes in the Mozart, but Miss Wilson said I recovered well." "You were wonderful," Catherine assured her, hugging her tightly. "Indeed," Jonathan agreed, "very poised and musical." Emily's face lit up even further at his praise. I was nervous when I saw you sitting there, but then I remembered what Pastor Mike says about playing for God's glory, not for people's approval, so I pretended I was just playing for God." Jonathan nodded, unsure how to respond to this theological approach to performance anxiety. "Well, it was clearly effective," he said finally. "Your technique showed significant improvement since you played for me at your home." "Practice makes perfect," Emily said cheerfully. "That's what Miss Wilson says." As they walked out of the chapel, Emily between them, Jonathan was acutely aware of how they must appear to others, like a normal family attending their child's recital. It was an illusion, of course. He was merely an employer with an unusually involved relationship with his household manager and her daughter. Yet the thought was not as alarming as it might once have been. "We're going for ice cream to celebrate," Catherine told him as they reached the parking lot. "Would you like to join us? It's becoming a tradition after Emily's performances." Jonathan should have declined. He had already spent his evening at a children's piano recital. Further socializing was unnecessary and unprofessional. "What flavor do you recommend?" he asked instead. Emily's recommendation of chocolate fudge brownie with extra hot fudge sauce led them to a small ice cream parlor near the school, where Jonathan found himself seated in a vinyl booth, watching Emily attack a sundae almost as large as her head, while he more sedately sampled a dish of premium vanilla. "Aren't you going to try mine?" Emily asked, pushing her monstrous creation toward him. "It's the best flavor combination in the universe." "I don't typically share food," Jonathan replied, then caught Catherine's amused expression. "What?" "Nothing," she said innocently. "It's just, Emily has a way of breaking down people's barriers, even yours." Before Jonathan could determine how to respond to this observation, Emily pushed her sundae closer to him. "Just one bite. Please? For science?" "For science?" Jonathan repeated. "Miss Thompson says scientists have to experiment to learn new things," Emily explained solemnly. "Maybe you'll discover you actually love chocolate fudge brownie with extra hot fudge sauce." Put that way, refusal seemed unreasonable. With careful precision, Jonathan took a small spoonful of Emily's sundae. "Well?" Emily asked eagerly. "Isn't it the best thing ever?" "It's very sweet," Jonathan replied diplomatically. Emily giggled. "That's the point of ice cream, silly." The word silly had likely never been applied to Jonathan Grayson in his adult life. Yet coming from Emily, it didn't feel insulting, merely an indication of the strange comfort level that had developed between them. "Emily," Catherine chided gently, "remember your manners. Mr. Grayson, Jonathan, is an adult and deserves respect." "Sorry," Emily said immediately, "but you smiled when I said it, so I thought it was okay." Had he smiled? Jonathan wasn't aware of it. "No offense taken," he assured both of them. As they finished their ice cream, Jonathan found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did. The simple pleasure of the moment, celebrating a child's achievement with ice cream, was so far removed from his usual activities that it felt almost like visiting a foreign country. "Do you have to go straight home?" Emily asked as they left the ice cream parlor. "We usually look at the stars on clear nights like this. There's a little park near our apartment with a good view of the sky." "Emily, I'm sure Jonathan has other commitments," Catherine began. "Actually," Jonathan said, surprising himself again, "I have no further obligations this evening." And so he found himself in a small neighborhood park, sitting on a bench beside Catherine, while Emily pointed out the constellations she had learned in science class. "That's Orion," she said, tracing the pattern with her finger, "and over there is the Big Dipper. Did you know it's not actually a constellation? It's part of Ursa Major, the Great Bear." "You're quite knowledgeable about astronomy," Jonathan observed. "Daddy taught me," Emily said. "He said when he was deployed, he'd look at the stars and know I was seeing the same ones, just at a different time. It made him feel closer to home." Catherine's expression softened at the mention of her late husband. "Richard loved the night sky. He learned all the constellations during his first deployment, said it gave him something beautiful to focus on in the darkness." A wise approach, Jonathan said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching as Emily continued to identify stars and planets. "Thank you for coming tonight," Catherine said eventually, her voice low enough that Emily couldn't hear. It meant a lot to her. "It was educational," Jonathan replied. "I've never observed a children's recital before," Catherine smiled. "You know, for someone who claims to make decisions based solely on practicality, you've shown extraordinary kindness to a little girl who has no practical value to your business interests." The observation was uncomfortably perceptive. Jonathan had been wrestling with similar thoughts himself. "Emily is unique," he said finally. "She has an unusual ability to cut through artifice." "It's because she sees with her heart," Catherine said. "She doesn't care about your wealth or position, she just sees you." "And what does she see?" Jonathan asked, genuinely curious. Catherine looked at him thoughtfully. "She sees someone kind hiding behind a wall of efficiency, someone lonely who's forgotten how to connect, someone who needs God's love as much as anyone else." The words struck uncomfortably close to truths Jonathan preferred not to examine. "That's quite an analysis from a 7-year-old. She doesn't articulate it that way, of course," Catherine said. "But children often perceive more than we give them credit for." Before Jonathan could respond, Emily ran back to them. "I saw a shooting star. Did you see it? You're supposed to make a wish." "I missed it," Catherine said. "Did you make a wish?" Emily nodded. "But I can't tell you, or it won't come true." "That's the rule," Catherine agreed solemnly. "It's getting late," Jonathan observed, checking his watch. "You have school tomorrow, Emily." Emily sighed but didn't argue. "Okay, thanks for coming to my recital and for ice cream and star watching. It was the perfect night." As they walked back to their cars, Emily slipped her hand into Jonathan's, a gesture that had become increasingly familiar over the past months. What was unfamiliar was how natural it now felt, this small connection to a child who had somehow breached his carefully constructed defenses. Later that night, in the silent expanse of his penthouse, Jonathan found himself standing at the windows, looking at the same stars they had observed together. For the first time in decades, he felt the vastness of his home as a void rather than a luxury. The following week brought an unexpected development. Catherine arrived for their regular meeting looking troubled. "Is everything all right?" Jonathan asked as she sat down. My health is stable," Catherine assured him. "It's just, I received a letter from my in-laws, Richard's parents. They've decided to move from Arizona to a retirement community in Cambridge to be closer to Emily." "I thought you said they weren't in good health themselves," Jonathan recalled. "They're not, which is why they want to be near their only grandchild while they still can." Catherine sighed. "It's a lovely gesture, and Emily will benefit from having more family nearby, but, Jonathan prompted when she hesitated. "They've never approved of how I've raised Emily," Catherine admitted. "They think I'm too permissive, that my faith isn't strict enough. Richard was raised in a very conservative household, and they expect the same for Emily. When they visit, they constantly criticize everything from her clothes to her education, to the music we listen to." "That sounds challenging," Jonathan observed neutrally. Catherine smiled wryly. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. They mean well, but they can be overwhelming, and now they'll be 15 minutes away instead of across the country." Jonathan considered this information. "Will their proximity affect your work arrangement?" "No, not at all," Catherine assured him quickly. "I'm just preparing myself for more frequent family friction." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, this isn't a professional concern. We should focus on the Cape House renovations." "Actually," Jonathan said, "I'd like to understand more about this situation. As your employer, any significant stresses in your life could potentially impact your health, which is a legitimate business concern given your condition." It was a rationalization, and they both knew it, but Catherine accepted the pretense. "Richard's parents are good people who love Emily. They're just rigid in their beliefs." They think my more progressive church is practically heretical, and they disapprove of Emily attending a school that teaches science alongside Bible studies rather than a stricter religious academy. They sound challenging, Jonathan said, choosing his words carefully. Catherine laughed. They are, but they're also Emily's only grandparents, and despite our differences, I want her to have that relationship. When do they arrive? Next Saturday. They've already leased an apartment in the retirement community. Jonathan nodded. If you need to adjust your schedule to help them settle in, that can be arranged. Thank you, Catherine said. That's very understanding. The conversation moved on to business matters, but Jonathan found himself returning to Catherine's situation later that day. He had no experience with in-law relationships, but he understood family dynamics and the complexities they created. Catherine's grace in managing what was clearly a difficult relationship for her daughter's benefit impressed him. It also stirred memories of his own childhood after his parents' deaths. The strict, joyless home of his father's cousin, who had taken him in until his grandmother could arrange to become his guardian. Those 2 years had been the loneliest of his life, full of rigid rules and constant criticism disguised as moral guidance. The following Saturday, without consciously planning it, Jonathan found himself driving to Catherine's neighborhood. He told himself he was merely checking on an employee during a potentially stressful situation, a reasonable action for an employer concerned about maintaining workforce stability. He arrived just as an airport taxi was pulling away from Catherine's building. Standing on the sidewalk were Catherine, Emily, and an elderly couple who must be the Sullivans. Even from a distance, Jonathan could see the tension in Catherine's posture as she helped the older couple with their luggage. Jonathan debated driving away, but Emily spotted his car and waved enthusiastically. There was no graceful exit now. He parked and approached the group, noting how Emily's face lit up at his arrival. "Jonathan," she called, running to meet him. "You came to meet my grandparents." "I was in the neighborhood," Jonathan lied smoothly. "I thought I'd check if your mother needed any assistance with the transition." Catherine's expression was a mixture of surprise and something that might have been relief. "Jonathan, what a coincidence. Let me introduce you to Richard's parents, Harold and Martha Sullivan. This is my employer, Jonathan Grayson." Harold Sullivan was a tall, thin man with a stern countenance that reminded Jonathan uncomfortably of his father's cousin. Martha was smaller, with Emily's blue eyes but none of her warmth. "Your employer?" Harold repeated, eyeing Jonathan suspiciously. "You came to help your employee on a Saturday?" "Mr. Grayson has been very supportive during my health challenges," Catherine explained. "Jonathan lets me stay at his Sky House when Mommy was in the hospital," Emily added excitedly. "He has a chef who makes pancakes shaped like animals, and we played chess, and he read me Bible stories." Both elder Sullivans looked startled by this information. "Bible stories?" Martha repeated doubtfully, studying Jonathan in his expensive suit. "David and Goliath," Jonathan confirmed, at Emily's request. "Jonathan knows lots of Bible verses," Emily continued, unaware of the tension. "And he came to my piano recital last week." Harold's eyebrows rose further. "You seem unusually involved in my granddaughter's life, Mr. Grayson." "Grandpa," Emily said before Jonathan could respond, "Jonathan is our friend. He helps Mommy with her heart medicine and lets her work from home so she doesn't get too tired." "I see," Harold said, though his tone suggested he didn't see at all. "Well, we should get settled in our new apartment. Catherine, we'll expect Emily for dinner tomorrow as we discussed." "Of course," Catherine agreed. "Let me help you with those bags." "I can assist," Jonathan offered, already reaching for the heavier suitcase. "That's very kind," Martha said, with slightly more warmth than her husband had shown. "Our apartment is just a few blocks away at the Riverdale retirement community." "I'll drive you," Jonathan said decisively. "My car is right here, and it will be more comfortable than walking." Catherine shot him a grateful look as he helped Harold and Martha into his luxury sedan. Emily insisted on riding along. chattering happily about how Jonathan's car had heated seats and a special button that made the windows change from clear to dark. At the retirement community, Jonathan helped bring the luggage to the Sullivans' new apartment, a modest but comfortable two-bedroom unit with a view of the Charles River. "This is quite nice," he observed. "Riverdale has an excellent reputation." "You're familiar with retirement communities, Mr. Grayson?" Harold asked, his tone suggesting he found this unlikely. "My company has real estate investments in senior living facilities," Jonathan replied. "It's a growing sector with the aging population." "I see," Harold said. "So this is a professional interest." "Partly," Jonathan acknowledged, "but also personal. My grandmother spent her final years in a community similar to this one. The quality of care is critical." This mention of his grandmother seemed to soften Harold slightly. "Yes, well, we researched extensively before choosing Riverdale. Their Christian values were a significant factor in our decision. They have a chapel on site," Martha added, "and Bible study groups 3 times a week." "Grandma, can I see your bedroom?" Emily asked, apparently tired of the adult conversation. "Of course, dear," Martha said, her expression warming as she took Emily's hand. "Come, I'll show you where you'll stay when you visit us." As they disappeared down the hallway, Harold turned to Catherine and Jonathan. "Catherine, I'd like a private word with you." Catherine tensed visibly. "Harold, today has been a long day of travel for you. Perhaps we could—" "It won't take long," Harold insisted. Jonathan recognized his cue to leave. "I should be going. It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sullivan. I hope you and your wife settle in comfortably." "Actually," Catherine said quickly, "Jonathan, could you help me bring up the rest of the bags from the lobby? I think the doorman was holding some." It was an obvious excuse, but Jonathan played along. "Of course." Once they were in the hallway with the door closed behind them, Catherine exhaled heavily. "I'm sorry about that. Harold wants to lecture me about something, probably Emily's education, or my church choice, or possibly your role in our lives. He's already made several comments about appropriate boundaries between employers and employees." "I can leave if my presence is complicating things," Jonathan offered. Catherine shook her head. "Actually, having you here helps. Harold is less likely to be overtly critical with an outsider present." She sighed. "I'm sorry to involve you in family drama." "It's not a problem," Jonathan assured her. "I understand difficult family dynamics." Catherine looked at him curiously. "Do you? You've never mentioned your family." "There's little to mention," Jonathan said. "My parents died when I was 12. I lived briefly with a relative similar to Harold in temperament, then with my grandmother until her death when I was 15. After that, I was essentially on my own." Catherine's expression softened with compassion. "I didn't know. I'm sorry, Jonathan." The genuine empathy in her voice made him uncomfortable. "It was a long time ago," he said dismissively. "Shall we go back in? There aren't actually any more bags, are there?" Catherine smiled slightly. "No, that was a fabrication, but we should return before Harold comes looking for us." When they re-entered the apartment, they found Emily showing Martha her latest piano music, while Harold watched with a mixture of pride and concern. "Emily tells us she's learning Mozart," Harold said when he saw them. "That seems advanced for her age." "It's a very simplified arrangement," Catherine explained. "Her teacher believes in challenging students appropriately." "And this teacher is from the Christian Academy?" Martha asked. "Yes, Miss Wilson is the music director there," Catherine confirmed. "Well, that's something at least," Harold said, "though we still believe the Central Christian Academy would provide a more solid foundation in the faith." Jonathan saw Catherine's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "We've discussed this, Harold. I believe in a more balanced approach to education." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when Emily bounced back into the room. "Grandma says I can help decorate the guest room since I'll be staying there sometimes." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Catherine said, clearly grateful for the interruption. "But we should let Grandma and Grandpa rest now. They've had a long journey." "Before you go," Harold said, "we should discuss tomorrow's dinner." Martha will prepare a proper Sunday meal after church. We expect you both at 9:30 for the service." It wasn't a request, Jonathan noted, but a statement of expectation. "Actually," Catherine said carefully, "Emily and I attend the 10 o'clock service at our church, but we'd be happy to join you for dinner afterward." Harold frowned. "Catherine, now that we're here, I think it would be appropriate for Emily to attend a proper church with us. That community center you call a church hardly provides the structured religious education a child needs." "Grandpa," Emily said, looking confused, "I like our church. Pastor Mike tells really good stories about Jesus, and we have a youth choir, and I have friends there." "I'm sure it's very entertaining," Harold said, his tone making the word sound like a criticism. "But church isn't about entertainment, Emily. It's about proper doctrine and respect for God's word." Jonathan saw Catherine's hands clench at her sides. Before she could respond, he found himself speaking. "I've been meaning to visit Catherine and Emily's church myself," he said smoothly. "Perhaps I could join them tomorrow, and we could all meet for dinner afterward." Everyone turned to stare at him in surprise, none more so than Catherine. "You want to attend church?" she asked, unable to hide her shock. "I'm curious about the community that shaped Emily's impressive spiritual awareness," Jonathan replied, the words coming easily despite their unexpectedness. "She quotes scripture with remarkable understanding for her age." Martha looked pleased by this observation. "Emily does have a gift for memorization. She gets that from Richard." "Then it's settled," Jonathan continued. "Catherine and Emily will attend their regular service with me as their guest, and then we'll all gather here for dinner. Would 4 o'clock be convenient?" Harold looked as if he wanted to object, but couldn't find a reasonable ground to do so. 4 o'clock is acceptable," he said finally. "Martha is making her special pot roast." "I look forward to it," Jonathan said politely. "Now we should let you rest and unpack." Outside the retirement community, Catherine turned to him with bewilderment. "Did you just invite yourself to church?" "It seemed the most efficient way to diffuse the situation," Jonathan replied. "I apologize if I overstepped." "No, it was helpful, actually," Catherine said, "but you don't have to follow through. I can tell them you had an emergency or—" "I said I would attend," Jonathan interrupted. "I keep my commitments." "But you don't believe—" "My beliefs are irrelevant to the commitment," Jonathan said. "What time should I pick you up tomorrow?" Catherine studied him for a moment, then nodded. 9:30. The service starts at 10, but parking can be challenging. "I'll be there," Jonathan promised. True to his word, Jonathan arrived at Catherine's apartment the next morning at precisely 9:30. He had given considerable thought to appropriate attire for a church visit, and had opted for a suit that was expensive, but not ostentatiously so. Emily answered the door, dressed in a pretty floral dress with her hair neatly brushed. "Jonathan, you really came. Mummy said you might be too busy." "I said I would come," Jonathan replied simply. Catherine appeared behind Emily, looking lovely in a modest blue dress that complemented her auburn hair. "Good morning, Jonathan. You didn't have to dress so formally. Our church is pretty casual." Jonathan glanced down at his suit. "This is my version of casual." Catherine laughed. "Of course it is. Well, you'll probably be the best-dressed person there, but no one will mind." The church, as Catherine had implied, was indeed housed in a converted community centre rather than a traditional church building. The parking lot was full of modest family vehicles, and people in everything from jeans to sundresses greeted each other warmly as they entered. Jonathan felt distinctly out of place, but Emily held his hand confidently as they walked in, as if his presence were the most natural thing in the world. "Pastor Mike," she called, waving to a man in his early 40s wearing khakis and a button-down shirt rather than clerical garb. "This is my friend Jonathan. He's coming to church with us today." Pastor Mike approached with a warm smile. "Welcome, Jonathan. Any friend of the Sullivans is welcome here at Community of Faith." "Thank you," Jonathan replied, shaking the offered hand. "I'm here primarily as an observer." "The best way to start," Pastor Mike said easily. "Just experience the service without pressure. God meets people where they are. Inside, the worship space was simple but welcoming. Rows of comfortable chairs faced a small stage with musical instruments. Natural light streamed through large windows, and the walls were decorated with colorful banners bearing inspirational messages. As they took their seats, Jonathan noted the diverse congregation, families with children, elderly couples, young singles, people of various ethnicities and apparent socio-economic backgrounds. It was nothing like the formal, homogeneous churches he vaguely remembered from his childhood. The service began with music, contemporary songs with theological lyrics, led by a small band. The congregation stood and sang enthusiastically, many raising their hands or closing their eyes in evident emotional connection to the worship. Jonathan remained seated, observing. Beside him, Catherine sang softly, her voice pleasant and melodic. Emily knew all the words, singing with the unself-conscious joy of a child. After the music, Pastor Mike took the stage for his sermon. Rather than fire and brimstone, he spoke conversationally about practical ways to live out Christian faith in daily life, showing kindness to strangers, practicing forgiveness, finding joy in difficult circumstances. Jesus didn't just preach love, Pastor Mike said. He demonstrated it through action. When he saw someone hurting, he didn't walk past them. When he encountered someone society had rejected, he invited them to dinner. When he met someone struggling with illness, he offered healing. Jonathan found himself surprisingly engaged by the message. It wasn't the abstract theology or rigid rules he'd expected, but a pragmatic approach to applying spiritual principles in real-world situations. Sometimes, Pastor Mike continued, God puts people in our path specifically to challenge our comfortable routines. The Good Samaritan could have walked past the injured man like everyone else did. It would have been easier, safer, more convenient, but he stopped. He helped. He got involved in someone else's messy, complicated life, and that's exactly what Jesus calls us to do. Throughout the sermon, Jonathan was acutely aware of Catherine beside him, of Emily listening attentively, of his own unexpected presence in this place. The pastor's words about getting involved in others' messy lives felt uncomfortably personal. After the service, they lingered in the lobby, where Emily insisted on introducing Jonathan to what seemed like half the congregation. Everyone was welcoming, asking simple questions about how he knew the Sullivans without prying too deeply. "What did you think?" Catherine asked as they finally headed to the car. "It was different from what I expected," Jonathan admitted. "More relevant to everyday life." "That's what I love about Pastor Mike," Catherine said. "He makes faith practical, not just theoretical." "I liked the song about God's love being like an ocean," Emily added from the back seat, "and Pastor Mike told that funny story about his dog knocking over the Christmas tree." "The personal anecdotes were effective communication tools," Jonathan acknowledged. "They made abstract concepts more accessible." Catherine smiled at his analytical assessment. "That's a very Jonathan way of saying it was a good sermon." "I didn't say it was good," Jonathan corrected. "I said it was effective." "Of course," Catherine agreed, her smile suggesting she didn't believe the distinction. The dinner with Harold and Martha proved less comfortable than the church service. From the moment they arrived at the retirement community apartment, Jonathan sensed the underlying tension between Catherine and her in-laws. "How was your service?" Harold asked, the pause before the last word making his opinion clear. "It was wonderful," Emily said before anyone else could respond. "Pastor Mike talked about the Good Samaritan, and he said sometimes God puts people in our way specifically to help them, even when it's not convenient." "Interesting timing for that message," Martha observed, glancing between Catherine and Jonathan. "And what did you think of the church, Mr. Grayson?" "It was welcoming," Jonathan replied diplomatically. "The congregation seems genuinely committed to living out their faith," Harold sniffed. "These modern churches focus too much on feelings and not enough on solid doctrine. In our day, church was about reverence and proper biblical teaching, not entertainment and casual fellowship." "We sing hymns at Grandpa's church," Emily said to Jonathan. "They're pretty too, just different." "I'm sure they are," Jonathan agreed. "Dinner is ready," Martha announced, heading off further discussion of theological differences. "I've made Richard's favourite pot roast recipe." The meal itself was delicious, and Jonathan said so, earning a small smile from Martha. The conversation remained carefully neutral for a time, focusing on the retirement community's amenities and the Sullivans' plans for settling in. "We're hoping to see Emily regularly," Harold said eventually. "Perhaps she could spend weekends with us, occasionally." "That would be lovely," Catherine said, "as long as it works with her activities schedule." "Activities?" Martha asked. "What activities could be more important than family time?" "I have piano lessons on Saturdays," Emily explained, "and sometimes I have play dates with my friends from church and school." "Well, those things can surely be rescheduled," Harold said dismissively. "Family should come first." Jonathan saw Catherine's jaw tighten again. "Emily's schedule is actually quite structured," she said carefully. "Consistency is important for children." "Catherine," Harold said, his tone patronizing, "Martha and I raised Richard to understand the importance of family obligations. He turned out to be a fine, responsible man with proper values, values we'd like to help instill in Emily." "I appreciate that," Catherine replied, maintaining her composure. "Richard was an exceptional man, and I'm grateful Emily has you both to share memories of him. But as her mother, I need to make decisions about her education and activities based on what I believe is best for her development. And you believe a liberal church and piano lessons are more important than the values her father was raised with." Harold's voice had an edge now. "Grandpa," Emily interrupted, looking distressed, "please don't be mad at Mommy. She works really hard to take care of me, even when her heart makes her tired." The simple plea seemed to deflate Harold somewhat. "I'm not angry, Emily. I just want what's best for you." "We all do," Jonathan said, speaking for the first time since the tension had risen. "And from my observation, Catherine is providing Emily with an excellent balance of spiritual, intellectual, and artistic development." Harold looked surprised by Jonathan's intervention. "With all due respect, Mr. Grayson, you hardly seem qualified to judge a child's spiritual development. Catherine mentioned you don't attend church regularly." "That's true," Jonathan acknowledged, "which makes me perhaps more objective about the results. Emily demonstrates remarkable spiritual maturity for her age. She quotes scripture appropriately, applies biblical principles to real-life situations, and shows genuine compassion for others. These are outcomes any Christian parent would desire, regardless of denominational preferences." Catherine stared at him, clearly stunned by his defense. Martha looked thoughtful, while Harold seemed caught off guard. "Well," Harold said finally, "I suppose the fruit of the teaching is important, but we still believe a more structured approach would serve Emily better in the long run." Perhaps," Jonathan suggested, "instead of focusing on differences in approach, you might consider complementary influences. Emily benefits from your traditional perspective as well as Catherine's more contemporary one. Both have value." Martha nodded slowly. "That's a reasonable point, Mr. Grayson. Harold, remember how we used to complain that Richard's Sunday school teacher was too strict? Yet that strictness helped him memorize scripture that stayed with him his whole life." Different approaches, complementary results," Jonathan said. Harold still looked skeptical, but nodded grudgingly. "I suppose we can discuss scheduling to accommodate Emily's activities while ensuring regular time with us." "Thank you," Catherine said, relief evident in her voice. "I want Emily to have a close relationship with you both. You're her connection to Richard, and that's irreplaceable." Dissous. The tension dissipated somewhat after that, and by the time dessert was served, Martha's homemade apple pie, the conversation had returned to safer topics. As they prepared to leave, Harold took Jonathan aside. "I appreciate your support of Catherine and Emily, Mr. Grayson, but I must confess I'm curious about your interest in their welfare. It seems to extend beyond a typical employer-employee relationship." Jonathan considered his response carefully. Miss Sullivan is an exceptional employee whose health challenges require certain accommodations. Ensuring her daughter's well-being is part of those accommodations. Is that all it is? Harold pressed. What else would it be? Jonathan countered. Harold studied him for a moment. Catherine is a beautiful, intelligent woman, raising a remarkable child alone. It would be natural for a man to notice those qualities. I notice excellence in all its forms, Mr. Sullivan. It's a professional habit. Harold nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Catherine and Emily have been through enough loss. I wouldn't want to see them hurt again. On that, we are in complete agreement, Jonathan said. During the drive back to Catherine's apartment, Emily fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the emotionally charged day. Thank you, Catherine said quietly, for coming to church, for dinner, for everything you said to Harold. I don't know why you did it, but I'm grateful. Jonathan kept his eyes on the road. Your in-laws mean well, but their approach seemed counterproductive. Mediation was the logical solution. Logical, Catherine repeated with a small smile. You make everything sound so rational, Jonathan, but I'm beginning to think there's more heart involved in your decisions than you care to admit. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself why he had spent his Sunday attending a church service and mediating a family dispute. Activity so far outside his normal routine as to be almost unrecognizable. Emily deserves stability, he said finally. Conflict between you and her grandparents would be detrimental to her emotional well-being. And you care about her emotional well-being because she's a child, Jonathan said, as if it were obvious. Children require consistent, supportive environments to develop properly. Catherine's smile widened slightly. So it's just basic child development principles guiding your actions? Nothing personal at all? Jonathan glanced in the rearview mirror at Emily's sleeping form. I didn't say that. The admission hung between them for several blocks before Catherine spoke again. You're a surprising man, Jonathan Grayson. I'm typically considered quite predictable, he replied. By people who only see the businessman, Catherine said, not the man who plays Bach from memory and defends a single mother's parenting choices to her in-laws. When they arrived at Catherine's apartment, Jonathan carried the sleeping Emily from the car while Catherine unlocked the door. He placed her gently on her bed, watching as Catherine removed her shoes and covered her with a light blanket. She didn't even stir, Catherine whispered as they left Emily's room. She trusts you completely. The observation affected Jonathan more deeply than he cared to admit. She's a remarkable child. She is, Catherine agreed. Would you like some coffee before you go? Or tea? Jonathan knew he should decline. The day had already involved more personal interaction than he typically allowed himself in a month, yet he found himself accepting the offer. As Catherine prepared tea in the small kitchen, Jonathan wandered to the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. You play beautifully, Catherine said, bringing 2 mugs to the coffee table. Emily still talks about your Bach minuet. I haven't practiced in decades, Jonathan said, joining her on the sofa. My grandmother would be disappointed. Was she the one who taught you? Jonathan nodded. She believed music was as essential as mathematics for a complete education. She was a pianist herself, classically trained at Juilliard before she married my grandfather. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Catherine said. She was, Jonathan agreed. After my parents died, she was everything, my teacher, my protector, my moral compass. She raised you well, Catherine observed. Despite your attempts to present yourself as purely rational, you have a strong moral core. Jonathan found himself uncomfortable with the observation. I believe in practical ethics. Honesty and fairness are efficient business practices. Catherine smiled over her tea. Is that why you spent your Sunday defending my parenting to my in-laws? Business efficiency? Perhaps not, Jonathan admitted. Some actions defy strict rationalization. Like attending church with us, Catherine suggested. You didn't have to do that. I was curious, Jonathan said. Emily speaks about her faith with such conviction. I wanted to understand its source. And did you understand? Jonathan considered the question carefully. Partially. The community aspect is evident, the sense of belonging and mutual support. The practical application of moral principles makes logical sense, but the emotional connection, the personal relationship with God that Emily describes, that remains elusive. Faith isn't always logical, Catherine said. Sometimes it's about trust, despite uncertainty, hope despite evidence to the contrary. Like believing your heart condition will improve when medical science suggests otherwise, Jonathan asked. Catherine nodded. Exactly like that. I don't deny medical reality, but I choose to hope while accepting whatever comes. Faith gives me the strength to face possibilities that would otherwise be overwhelming. And if the outcome is negative despite your faith, then I trust that God's perspective is broader than mine, Catherine said simply. That doesn't make the pain less real, but it provides a framework for enduring it. When Richard died, my faith was the only thing that kept me functioning. Jonathan found this perspective simultaneously irrational and compelling. Emily has the same outlook. Children often have a purer faith than adults, Catherine agreed. They haven't learned all our sophisticated doubts yet. They talked for another hour, moving from faith to music to literature. Jonathan was surprised by how easily the conversation flowed, how refreshing it was to discuss topics unrelated to business or finance. When he finally rose to leave, Catherine walked him to the door. Thank you again for today. You made what could have been a difficult situation much easier. You're welcome, Jonathan said. I hope things improve with your in-laws. They will, Catherine said confidently. They love Emily, and ultimately that's what matters most. She hesitated, then added, I enjoyed having you at church with us. You'd be welcome any time. Thank you, Jonathan replied, unsure how to respond to the invitation. Good night, Catherine. Good night, Jonathan. As he drove home, Jonathan found himself reviewing the day's events with a mixture of confusion and something approaching contentment. He had spent his Sunday in activities that would have been inconceivable a year ago. Attending a church service, mediating a family dispute, carrying a sleeping child to bed, discussing faith and music over tea in a modest apartment. What was happening to him? The Jonathan Grayson, who had built Grayson Capital into a financial powerhouse, didn't attend Christian services or defend single mothers to their in-laws. He didn't play piano for 7-year-olds or mediate family disputes. Yet he had done all those things, and strangest of all, he didn't regret any of it. The next few months brought more changes to Jonathan's carefully ordered life. Emily's birthday approached, and Catherine mentioned during one of their weekly meetings that the child hoped he would attend her small celebration. It's just a few friends from school, plus Harold and Martha, Catherine explained, very low-key. But Emily specifically asked if you could come. When is it? Jonathan asked, already checking his calendar. Next Saturday at 2. We're having a little party at the apartment, then taking the children to the aquarium. Catherine looked embarrassed. I know it's not the sort of event you typically attend. I'll be there, Jonathan said simply. The birthday party was indeed unlike anything in Jonathan's usual social calendar. 6 excited 7-year-olds, a homemade cake decorated with somewhat lopsided music notes, party games involving much squealing and laughter, and Harold and Martha watching with a mixture of joy and mild disapproval at the noise level. Jonathan brought Emily a gift he had spent considerable time selecting, a high-quality beginner's keyboard with headphones and a built-in tutorial program. So you can practice even when it's late, he explained, as Emily unwrapped it with wide-eyed amazement. The headphones ensure you won't disturb anyone. It's amazing, Emily exclaimed, throwing her arms around him in an enthusiastic hug. Thank you, Jonathan. It's the best present ever. Catherine looked shocked at the expensive gift. "Jonathan, that's far too generous. It's educational," Jonathan interrupted. "Musical training enhances mathematical aptitude and cognitive development." Harold and Martha exchanged meaningful glances, but said nothing. At the aquarium, Jonathan found himself assigned to supervise Emily and her best friend, Zoe, as they explored the exhibits. To his surprise, he enjoyed their enthusiastic questions and observations, their unfiltered wonder at the underwater creatures. "Look, Jonathan," Emily called, pointing at a giant sea turtle gliding past the glass. "Isn't he magnificent? God made so many amazing animals." "He is impressive," Jonathan agreed, watching the ancient creature move with surprising grace through the water. "My dad says sea turtles can live to be over 100 years old," Zoe informed him seriously. "That's older than my grandpa." "Your father is correct," Jonathan said. "Some species of sea turtles have lifespans comparable to humans, though determining their exact age is challenging for researchers." Both girls looked at him with admiration. "You know everything," Emily declared. "Hardly," Jonathan replied, "but I do read extensively." "Mommy says reading makes you smart," Emily said. "That's why we read the Bible every night, to get spiritually smart." "An interesting concept," Jonathan observed. "Spiritual intelligence." "Yeah, like knowing right from wrong and how to love people properly," Emily explained, as if this were obvious. "Come on, let's go see the sharks." As the girls raced ahead to the next exhibit, Catherine appeared beside Jonathan. "Having fun?" "It's educational," he replied automatically, then caught her knowing smile. "Yes, actually, their enthusiasm is refreshing." "Children see wonder everywhere," Catherine agreed. "It's one of the things I love about being a mother. Emily helps me see the world through fresh eyes." "She has that effect," Jonathan admitted. "I found myself noticing things I typically overlook since meeting her." "Like what?" Catherine asked curiously. Jonathan considered the question. "Stars, music, the value of questions without immediate practical application." "The impractical can be valuable too," Catherine said softly. "So I'm learning," Jonathan replied. Their eyes met, and Jonathan felt something shift between them, a moment of connection that went beyond their professional relationship or even their growing friendship. Catherine's expression softened, and Jonathan found himself wondering what it would be like to— "Mommy, Jonathan, come see the octopus!" Emily called from the next room, breaking the moment. Catherine smiled slightly and looked away. "We're being summoned." "Just so it seems," Jonathan agreed, following her toward the excited children. The following week, Catherine arrived for their meeting looking pale and exhausted. Jonathan immediately noticed her condition. "You're unwell," he said, concern evident in his voice. "We can reschedule." Catherine shook her head. "No, I'm fine, just tired. I had tests at the hospital yesterday and they're always draining." "What did the tests show?" Jonathan asked directly. Catherine hesitated, then sighed. "Not what we hoped. The medication is becoming less effective. Dr. Winters wants to adjust the treatment plan again, but—" She trailed off. "But," Jonathan prompted. "But he's also moving my status on the transplant list to higher priority," Catherine finished quietly. "My heart function is declining faster than expected." Jonathan felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest at her words. "What's the timeline?" "Without a transplant, maybe a year," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the devastating prognosis. "With optimal medical management." "And with a transplant?" "A normal lifespan, potentially. But finding a match with my blood type and tissue markers—" She shrugged slightly. "It's in God's hands." Jonathan had never felt so frustrated by an answer. "Surely there are actions we can take. Specialized treatment centers, experimental procedures. I'm already at one of the best hospitals in the country," Catherine reminded him gently. "Dr. Winters is a leading cardiologist. There's nothing more to be done except wait and pray." "Prayer seems insufficient," Jonathan said, more harshly than he intended. "It's all any of us can do sometimes," Catherine replied. "That and make the most of the time we have." "Ooh, what does Emily know?" That Mommy's heart is still sick, but doctors are working hard to help. She doesn't know the timeline has shortened. Catherine's composure finally cracked slightly. I don't know how to prepare her for the possibility that I might not. You will, Jonathan said firmly. A donor will be found. Catherine smiled sadly at his certainty. I hope you're right. But if not, I need to know Emily will be cared for. Of course she will, Jonathan assured her. Your in-laws are in their 70s with health issues of their own, Catherine interrupted. They could help in the short term, but Emily needs more than that. I've been updating my will and guardianship arrangements. The conversation had taken a turn Jonathan hadn't anticipated. Have you identified a guardian? My cousin in Chicago is willing, but she has 4 children of her own already. It wouldn't be ideal. Catherine looked down at her hands. I'm exploring options. Jonathan found himself saying, I would ensure Emily's well-being. Catherine's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. What? If necessary, I would take responsibility for Emily's care and education, Jonathan clarified, the words coming without conscious planning. Financially, educationally, emotionally, all her needs would be met. Jonathan, Catherine said carefully, I don't even know what to say. You're talking about becoming a parent to a child you've known less than a year. I'm discussing a contingency plan, Jonathan replied, trying to frame the offer in practical terms. In the unlikely event that a transplant isn't available in time. Becoming a guardian isn't like hiring an employee, Catherine pressed. It's a lifetime commitment to raise someone else's child as your own. I understand the implications, Jonathan said. The offer stands. Catherine studied him intently. Why would you do this? It was a simple question that required a complex answer, one Jonathan wasn't sure he fully understood himself. Why would he, a confirmed bachelor with no parenting experience, offer to raise a child? Why had Emily Sullivan, with her Bible verses and piano recitals, become so important to him in such a short time? Emily deserves stability and opportunities, he said finally. I can provide both. Those are practical considerations, Catherine observed. But raising a child requires love, Jonathan. Do you love Emily? The question caught him off guard. Love wasn't a word Jonathan used often or ever in recent memory. Yet as he considered Emily's bright spirit, her thoughtful questions, her implicit trust in him, he recognized that his feelings for her went far beyond mere responsibility or obligation. Yes, he said simply. I believe I do. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for that honesty. It means more than you know. This is a hypothetical discussion, Jonathan reminded her, uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment. You will receive a transplant and recover fully. From your lips to God's ears, Catherine said with a sad smile. But thank you for offering. It gives me peace to know Emily has someone who truly cares about her future. They moved on to business matters after that, but Jonathan found it difficult to focus on household budgets and scheduling issues. The reality of Catherine's deteriorating condition and the implications of his spontaneous offer occupied his thoughts. That evening he sat alone in his penthouse, looking out at the city lights. What had possessed him to offer guardianship of a child? It was unprecedented, irrational, and yet he realized absolutely sincere. The thought of Emily being raised by distant relatives who didn't understand her gentle spirit or foster her musical talents was unacceptable. The idea of her losing not only her mother, but her home, her school, her friends, everything familiar, seemed unnecessarily cruel. But was he equipped to raise a child? Jonathan had no illusions about his parenting qualifications. He worked long hours, had limited experience with children, and knew nothing about the day-to-day responsibilities of caring for a growing girl. Yet, he had resources: financial security, educational connections, the ability to provide opportunities, and more importantly, he had come to care deeply for Emily's well-being. Perhaps that was a starting point. For the first time in decades, Jonathan found himself doing something he had abandoned long ago. He prayed, not with Emily's confident faith or Catherine's trusting acceptance, but with the desperate hope of someone facing a situation beyond his control. "If you're there," he whispered to the empty room. "If you're listening, help Catherine. Find her a heart. Don't take her from Emily." He paused, feeling foolish, yet compelled to continue. "And if that's not possible, help me be what Emily needs." The words hung in the silence of his penthouse, neither answered nor rejected. Jonathan didn't experience any dramatic sense of divine presence, but the act of articulating his concerns brought a strange comfort nonetheless. 2 weeks later, Catherine collapsed during their weekly meeting. One moment she was discussing the summer maintenance schedule for the Cape House, the next she was unconscious on his office floor. The next hours passed in a blur of ambulances, emergency rooms, and tense conversations with medical personnel. Dr. Winters confirmed what they already feared. Catherine's heart was failing rapidly. She was placed on life support while they desperately searched for a matching donor heart. Jonathan took immediate responsibility for Emily, who was collected from school by Margaret and brought to the hospital. The child's quiet terror as she saw her mother connected to machines broke something in Jonathan that he hadn't known could break. "Is Mommy going to heaven like Daddy?" she asked him, her small hand clutching his as they stood outside the ICU. Jonathan knelt to her level, meeting her frightened blue eyes directly. "The doctors are doing everything possible to help your mother. They're looking for a special heart that can replace her sick one." "Can I give her my heart?" Emily asked, with the simple logic of a child. "No, sweetheart," Jonathan said, the endearment slipping out naturally. "You need your heart. But somewhere there's a heart that can help your mother. We just need to find it." "We should pray," Emily said decisively. "God knows where the right heart is." Without waiting for a response, she bowed her head and closed her eyes, still holding Jonathan's hand. "Dear God, please help the doctors find a new heart for Mommy. You made all the hearts, so you know which one will fit her best. Please bring it quickly so she can get better, and please help her not be scared. Amen." "Amen," Jonathan echoed, finding comfort in the ritual despite his skepticism. Harold and Martha arrived shortly after, their faces drawn with worry and fear. Despite their differences with Catherine, it was clear they cared deeply for her. "What are the doctors saying?" Harold demanded. Jonathan gave them the unvarnished truth. Catherine needed a transplant immediately, but her rare blood type and tissue markers made finding a match challenging. She could remain on life support for only so long. "We've called our prayer chain," Martha said, pulling Emily close. "The whole church is praying." Jonathan nodded, not dismissing their faith-based response, but unwilling to rely solely on it. He had already made calls to his extensive network of medical connections, seeking any available heart that might match Catherine's requirements. For 3 days, they maintained a vigil at the hospital. Jonathan arranged for a private waiting room where Emily could rest on a comfortable sofa, brought in food that she might be tempted to eat despite her anxiety, and ensured that Dr. Winters updated them personally every few hours. On the evening of the 3rd day, Harold pulled Jonathan aside. "We need to discuss arrangements for Emily," he said gravely. "If Catherine doesn't—" "Catherine has expressed her wishes regarding Emily's guardianship," Jonathan interrupted. "I've promised to ensure those wishes are respected." Harold looked surprised. "And what wishes are those?" "That Emily remains in her current school, continues her music education, and maintains the stability of her existing life as much as possible," Jonathan said. "I've committed to providing that stability." Harold's eyebrows rose. You're offering to raise Emily yourself, if necessary," Jonathan confirmed, "though I remain confident that Catherine will recover." "That's unexpected," Harold said. "You're an unmarried businessman with no children. What qualifies you to raise our granddaughter?" "Nothing but my commitment to her well-being and my respect for Catherine's parenting," Jonathan admitted honestly. but I have the resources to maintain Emily's current life with minimal disruption, which neither you nor Catherine's cousin in Chicago can offer." Harold seemed about to argue further when Dr. Winters appeared in the waiting room, his expression both urgent and hopeful. "We may have found a match," he announced. "A donor heart has become available in Providence. We're confirming compatibility now, but the preliminary markers are promising. If it's a match, we'll need to move quickly." The next hours were a whirlwind of activity. The heart was indeed compatible. Not perfect, but close enough that with anti-rejection medications, it offered Catherine her best chance. A medical transport team was dispatched to retrieve the donor heart while Catherine was prepared for surgery. They were allowed to see her briefly before the procedure. She was conscious but weak, her eyes focusing with effort as Emily approached the bed. "Hey, sweetie," she whispered, managing a small smile for her daughter. "Mommy," Emily said, touching her hand carefully around the IV lines. "The doctors found you a new heart. God heard our prayers." "He always does," Catherine agreed softly. "You be brave while I'm in surgery, okay? Jonathan and Grandma and Grandpa will take care of you." "I will," Emily promised. "I'll be brave like David with Goliath." Catherine smiled, then turned her gaze to Jonathan. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." "Save your strength," Jonathan told her. "You have a long recovery ahead." "Always practical," Catherine whispered, her eyes drifting closed with fatigue. "That's what I admire about you." The surgery lasted 9 hours. Jonathan, Emily, Harold and Martha waited together, an unlikely family united by their concern for Catherine. Emily eventually fell asleep on the waiting room sofa, exhausted by emotion and the late hour. "She trusts you," Martha observed quietly, watching as Jonathan carefully covered Emily with his suit jacket. "More than she trusts most adults." "Children are remarkably perceptive," Jonathan replied. "Yes, they are," Martha agreed. "Which makes me wonder what she sees in you that perhaps you don't see in yourself." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning that my granddaughter, who has experienced significant loss and has every reason to be cautious with her heart, has clearly given a piece of it to you," Martha said. "And I suspect the feeling is mutual, despite your attempts to frame everything in practical terms." Jonathan didn't respond immediately, watching Emily's peaceful, sleeping face. "She's an exceptional child," he said finally. "It would be difficult not to care for her." "And her mother?" Martha asked perceptively. Jonathan met her gaze. "Catherine is one of the strongest, most gracious people I've ever known. Her faith in the face of extraordinary challenges is humbling." Martha nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "That's what I thought." When Dr. Winters finally appeared, his exhausted face bore a cautious smile. "The surgery was successful. Catherine's new heart is functioning well. The next 48 hours are critical for preventing rejection, but the initial signs are very positive." Emily woke to this news, immediately kneeling on the waiting room floor to offer a prayer of thanks. Harold and Martha joined her, while Jonathan stood awkwardly to the side, moved by their simple faith, even as he credited medical science for the outcome. The following weeks brought a new routine. Catherine remained hospitalized for 2 weeks before being transferred to a rehabilitation facility for another month. Jonathan arranged for Emily to stay with him during this time, with Harold and Martha helping during his working hours. To his surprise, he and the elder Sullivans developed a functional partnership in caring for Emily. Their shared concern for the child superseded their differences, and they found common ground in wanting to maintain her routine and spirits during her mother's recovery. Emily moved into the guest room at Jonathan's penthouse, transforming the space with her presence. Colorful drawings appeared on the refrigerator, piano music filled the evening hours, and children's books accumulated on previously pristine surfaces. Jonathan adjusted his schedule to be home for dinner each evening, helping Emily with homework and listening to her practice piano before their nightly visits to Catherine. He learned to make simple meals, to check that teeth were properly brushed, to listen for nightmares after the lights were out. Catherine improved steadily, growing stronger each day as her body adapted to the new heart. By the time she was ready to return home, Jonathan had experienced a transformation nearly as profound as hers. From isolated businessman to something approximating a parent. The day Catherine came home, Jonathan helped prepare the apartment, ensuring everything was arranged for her comfort and convenience. Emily was beside herself with excitement, barely able to focus on her schoolwork. "Mommy's coming home today," she announced for perhaps the 20th time as Jonathan drove her to the rehabilitation facility for the final discharge. "Yes, she is," Jonathan agreed patiently. "But remember, she'll still need rest and quiet. She won't be completely recovered for several months." "I know," Emily said. "I'll be super helpful and quiet as a mouse. I've been practicing." Jonathan smiled. "I've noticed your quiet as a mouse skills have improved significantly." When they arrived at the facility, Catherine was sitting in a wheelchair as required by hospital policy, but she stood carefully to embrace Emily, who ran to her with barely contained excitement. "Mommy, you're really coming home?" "I really am," Catherine confirmed, hugging her daughter tightly. "Thanks to God and these amazing doctors, and Jonathan, who's taken such good care of you." Her eyes met Jonathan's over Emily's head, filled with gratitude and something more complex that he couldn't quite define. "It was educational," Jonathan said, falling back on his standard explanation for involvement in their lives. Catherine's smile suggested she wasn't fooled by his detachment. "I'm sure it was. Emily told me all about teaching you to make macaroni and cheese from the box. A valuable culinary skill," Jonathan said with mock seriousness. "Though I maintain that following the package directions would have produced superior results to Emily's creative approach." "But mine was more fun," Emily insisted. "And you laughed when the cheese powder went everywhere." "I expressed amusement at the inefficiency of your methodology," Jonathan corrected, but his lips twitched with the memory. Catherine watched their interaction with evident wonder. "You two have developed quite a rapport." Jonathan's really good at bedtime stories," Emily informed her mother. "He does all the different voices, even better than Daddy used to." A shadow of grief passed over Catherine's face at the mention of her late husband, but she smiled through it. "Is that so? I'll have to hear this performance sometime." "Perhaps," Jonathan said, suddenly self-conscious. "Shall we get you home?" The return to Catherine's apartment marked a transition Jonathan hadn't fully prepared for. After weeks of having Emily in his home, of developing routines and shared jokes and small rituals, he was now essentially returning her to her mother. It was the right thing, the necessary thing, the thing he had hoped and prayed for. Yet, as he helped Catherine settle in, explaining the medication schedule he had memorized and the meal delivery service he had arranged, he felt an unfamiliar sense of loss. "You've thought of everything," Catherine said as he showed her the new app on her phone that would track her medication times and send reminders. "Systematic planning prevents complications," Jonathan replied. "And the flowers?" Catherine asked, gesturing to the fresh arrangements throughout the apartment. "Were those systematic too?" Jonathan felt unexpectedly flustered. "Emily mentioned you prefer lilies. The therapeutic benefits of pleasant surroundings on recovery are well documented." Catherine's smile was knowing. "Of course, purely practical." As the evening drew to a close, the moment of departure became inevitable. Emily, who had been showing Catherine all the drawings and schoolwork she had completed during her absence, suddenly seemed to realize Jonathan was preparing to leave. "You're going?" she asked, her expression falling. "Your mother is home now," Jonathan explained gently. "You'll stay here with her as before." "But you'll come visit, right?" Emily pressed. "And I can still visit you?" Jonathan looked to Catherine, uncertain how to respond. Their arrangement had been necessary during her illness and recovery, but now that she was home, would she want to maintain his involvement in their lives? "Jonathan is always welcome here," Catherine assured Emily. "And I'm sure he'll want to hear you practice piano and see your school projects." Of course, Jonathan agreed, relieved by Catherine's response. Our chess matches remain unresolved. I demand a rematch for that suspicious victory you claimed last week. Emily giggled. It wasn't suspicious. I won fair and square. We'll see about that, Jonathan said seriously. Next time, I'll be watching for your tricky night maneuvers. After a slightly awkward goodbye, Emily insisting on a hug that Jonathan returned more naturally than he once would have, he found himself alone in his car, staring at the familiar apartment building that housed the two people who had somehow become central to his life. His penthouse felt emptier than ever that night. No piano music, no childish chatter, no small person appearing at his office door to ask for help with multiplication tables or to show him a particularly impressive drawing. The silence he had once valued now felt oppressive. Over the following weeks, Jonathan established a new pattern. He visited Catherine and Emily regularly, initially under the pretense of checking on Catherine's recovery, then more openly for dinner, or to take Emily to music lessons when Catherine wasn't yet strong enough. Catherine's return to work was gradual, with reduced hours and continued remote arrangements. Their weekly meetings resumed, though they now often ended with Jonathan staying for dinner or helping Emily with a school project. As Christmas approached, Emily became increasingly excited about the holiday traditions she and Catherine shared. During one of their chess games, she described their usual celebrations. We always go to the Christmas Eve service at church, and then we come home and Mommy lets me open one present early, she explained, carefully moving her bishop. Then on Christmas morning, we read the story of Jesus' birth from the Bible before we open the rest of the presents. And then we make pancakes shaped like Christmas trees. That sounds like a well-established tradition, Jonathan observed, countering her move with his knight. What do you do for Christmas? Emily asked. The question gave Jonathan pause. In recent years, Christmas had been merely another day, perhaps marked by an obligatory appearance at a colleague's holiday gathering or a phone call to distant acquaintances. I typically use the quiet time to review year-end reports, he said finally. Emily looked horrified. You work on Christmas? But it's Jesus' birthday. It's supposed to be special. Different people celebrate differently, Jonathan explained, uncomfortable with her dismay. You should spend Christmas with us, Emily declared decisively. Then you can see how it's supposed to be. Emily, Catherine chided gently from where she was reading on the sofa. Jonathan might have other plans. Do you? Emily asked directly. No specific commitments, Jonathan admitted. Then it's settled, Emily said with the absolute certainty of a child. You'll come to church with us on Christmas Eve and stay overnight, so you're here for Christmas morning. We have a fold-out couch. Jonathan looked to Catherine, who seemed both amused and slightly embarrassed by her daughter's forwardness. Emily, we can't just commandeer Jonathan's holiday. I would be honored to join you, Jonathan interrupted, surprising himself as much as Catherine. If you're certain I wouldn't be intruding on your family time. Catherine's expression softened. You wouldn't be intruding at all. You're important to us. The simple statement affected Jonathan more deeply than he cared to admit. Thank you. Checkmate, Emily announced triumphantly, moving her queen to trap Jonathan's king. Jonathan examined the board with genuine surprise. Well played. I was distracted by holiday planning. Excuses, Emily teased, mimicking his own words from a previous game. Christmas Eve arrived with a light snow that transformed Boston into a scene from a greeting card. Jonathan arrived at Catherine's apartment with gifts, carefully selected with Margaret's assistance, and a bottle of sparkling cider for their celebration. The church service was unlike anything Jonathan had experienced before. The chapel was decorated with evergreens and candles, the music both traditional and joyful. Emily, wearing a red velvet dress Catherine had sewn herself, sang with the children's choir, her clear voice rising with the other children in a manger. Jonathan, sitting beside Catherine in the candlelit sanctuary, found himself moved by the simple beauty of the service. The pastor spoke not of judgment or obligation, but of hope and love entering the world through the birth of a child, a message that resonated unexpectedly. At the conclusion, as they sang Silent Night holding lit candles, Jonathan glanced at Catherine's face, glowing in the warm light. She caught his gaze and smiled, her eyes reflecting the candlelight and something deeper, a peace he was only beginning to understand. Back at the apartment, Emily was allowed to open one gift, new pajamas with musical notes printed on them, a tradition Catherine explained they had maintained since Emily's first Christmas. "Now you'll look festive for Christmas morning," Catherine told her daughter, who immediately went to change. While Emily was occupied, Jonathan helped Catherine arrange the remaining presents under the small tree they had decorated together the previous week. "Thank you for including me," he said quietly. "This is unlike any Christmas I've experienced in many years." "Since your grandmother," Catherine guessed perceptively. Jonathan nodded. "She made Christmas meaningful. After she died, it became just another day." "I'm glad you're here," Catherine said simply. "You've become important to both of us, Jonathan. I hope you know that." Before he could respond, Emily returned in her music-themed pajamas, eager to set out cookies for Santa, a tradition she maintained despite, as she explained to Jonathan very seriously, knowing that Santa is just a fun story based on a real saint who loved giving gifts to children. Once Emily was finally asleep, excited but exhausted, Jonathan helped Catherine arrange the presents and prepare for the morning. As they worked together in companionable silence, he found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him here. From isolated businessman to spending Christmas Eve arranging presents for a child he had come to love, in the home of a woman who had somehow bypassed all his carefully constructed defenses. "Penny for your thoughts," Catherine said, noticing his contemplative expression. "I was just considering how unexpected life can be," Jonathan replied. "A year ago, if someone had described my current situation, I would have dismissed it as implausible fiction." "Life rarely follows our carefully laid plans," Catherine agreed, "sometimes, thankfully." "Indeed," Jonathan said softly. "Thankfully." Christmas morning began early with Emily bouncing on the fold-out couch where Jonathan had spent a surprisingly comfortable night. "Wake up! It's Christmas!" she announced, at a volume entirely inappropriate for 6:30 in the morning. Catherine appeared in her robe looking apologetic. "I tried to contain her excitement until at least 7, but as you can see, I failed." "I'm awake," Jonathan assured them, sitting up. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," Emily replied joyfully. "First, we read the Christmas story, then presents, then pancakes." True to tradition, they gathered around the tree, while Catherine read the nativity account from Luke's Gospel. Jonathan listened with new appreciation, hearing the familiar story through Emily's excited commentary and Catherine's gentle explanations. The gift exchange that followed was modest by Jonathan's financial standards, but rich in thoughtfulness. Emily had made him a handcrafted bookmark with a hand-drawn piano and the words, "Music makes life beautiful," carefully printed in her best handwriting. Catherine had given him a vintage edition of Bach's Preludes and Fugues, "for when you decide to practice again," she explained. His gifts to them seemed almost excessive in comparison, a professional-quality digital piano for Emily that could be connected to composition software, and for Catherine, a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a heart, with Emily's birthstone set within it. "It's too much," Catherine protested when she opened the small jewelry box. "It's a heart that will never fail," Jonathan said quietly, "a small celebration of your new beginning." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she understood the symbolism. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's perfect." Emily's reaction to the piano was everything Jonathan had hoped for, pure joy and excitement as he explained its features and capabilities. "This means you can compose your own music," he told her. "The software will transcribe what you play." "Like real composers?" Emily asked, awestruck. "Exactly like real composers," Jonathan confirmed, "because that's what you are, a real musician." The morning continued with promised Christmas tree pancakes, which Jonathan helped prepare with considerably more skill than his first cooking attempts months earlier. As they ate together, laughing and planning how to set up Emily's new piano, Jonathan felt a sense of belonging he had not experienced since his grandmother's death. This, he realized, was what people meant when they spoke of family, not merely biological connection, but this sense of being fully known and accepted, of shared jokes and traditions, of belonging somewhere and to someone. As the day progressed, Harold and Martha joined them for Christmas dinner, a meal that was far more harmonious than their first encounter. The elder Sullivans had gradually come to accept Catherine's parenting decisions, and somewhat surprisingly, Jonathan's role in their lives. "Emily tells us you've been teaching her chess strategy," Harold remarked, as they enjoyed Catherine's Christmas pudding. "She's a quick study," Jonathan replied, "already developing solid tactical thinking." "She gets that from her father," Harold said with pride. "Richard was county chess champion in high school." "I didn't know that," Jonathan said, genuinely interested. "Emily never mentioned it." "She wouldn't remember," Martha explained. "Richard stopped playing regularly after college, but he had a brilliant mind for strategy." "Like daddy, like daughter," Catherine said softly. The conversation continued, weaving between memories of Richard and plans for the future. Jonathan observed how Catherine balanced honoring her late husband's memory while embracing their current life, a grace he found himself admiring deeply. As the evening drew to a close and Harold and Martha prepared to leave, Martha surprised Jonathan by embracing him warmly. "Thank you for being there for them," she said quietly. "It brings us peace to know they have someone who cares so deeply." The simple acknowledgement of what Jonathan himself had only recently come to accept left him momentarily speechless. "They're important to me," he managed finally. "Yes," Martha said knowingly. "We've noticed." After the elder Sullivans departed and Emily was finally in bed, reluctantly, after extracting promises that Jonathan would help set up her new piano the next day, Jonathan and Catherine sat in the living room, the Christmas tree lights casting a warm glow over the apartment. "Thank you for today," Catherine said softly. "I haven't seen Emily this happy at Christmas since before Richard died." "I should be thanking you," Jonathan replied. "This is the first meaningful Christmas I've experienced in 30 years. "Meaningful how?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious. Jonathan considered the question carefully. "When my grandmother was alive, Christmas was about belonging somewhere, being part of something larger than myself. After she died, I lost that connection. Today, I felt it again." Catherine studied him in the soft light. "What changed, Jonathan? When Emily first approached you in your building that day, you could have walked past her. Most people would have. What made you stop?" It was a question Jonathan had asked himself many times over the past months. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "Something in her eyes, perhaps. A determination I recognized. Or maybe—" He paused, searching for words to express a truth he was only beginning to understand. "Maybe I was ready to hear a different voice, one that wasn't about profit margins or market share." "God works in mysterious ways," Catherine said simply. "So it would seem," Jonathan agreed, no longer dismissing her faith as he once might have. "Whether divine intervention or statistical improbability, meeting Emily that day altered my life's trajectory in ways I couldn't have predicted." "And mine," Catherine added softly. "Without your intervention, I might not be sitting here today." The implication hung between them, the realization that their lives had become intertwined through a series of unlikely circumstances and choices that defied Jonathan's carefully ordered worldview. "Catherine," he said after a moment, "I need to tell you something." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm listening." "These past months have changed me," Jonathan began, finding himself uncharacteristically uncertain of his words. "Being part of your lives, watching your faith in action, experiencing family in a way I'd forgotten was possible, it's awakened something I thought was long dead." "What's that?" Catherine asked gently. "Hope," Jonathan said simply. Hope that life can be more than achievement and acquisition. That connection matters more than accomplishment. That He hesitated, then continued with unaccustomed vulnerability, that I might still have something to offer beyond financial success. Catherine reached across the space between them to take his hand. You have so much to offer, Jonathan. Emily and I have seen it all along, even when you couldn't. Her touch was warm, her eyes reflecting the Christmas lights as she looked at him. Jonathan felt something shift between them, a boundary dissolving, a possibility emerging. I care for you both, he said, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling behind them. More than I thought possible. We care for you too, Catherine replied softly. You've become essential to us. Where does that leave us? Jonathan asked, the businessman in him seeking clarity even in this most unbusinesslike of moments. Catherine smiled. At the beginning of something new. Something neither of us was looking for, but perhaps both of us needed. Jonathan nodded, understanding the wisdom of her patient approach. They had time now, time for whatever might develop between them to grow naturally, without pressure or expectation. As the clock struck midnight, marking the end of Christmas Day, Jonathan realized he had received a gift far more valuable than anything money could buy. A second chance at connection, at family, at faith, a pathway back to the humanity he had nearly forgotten in his pursuit of success. Merry Christmas, Catherine, he said quietly. Merry Christmas, Jonathan, she replied, her hand still warm in his. Here's to new beginnings. Outside, snow continued to fall softly on Boston, covering the city in a blanket of white that transformed everything it touched, much like the quiet transformation taking place in Jonathan Grayson's heart, all because a little girl had once approached him with 5 simple words. Help me, my mother is sick.